Ever felt under the weather and thought, you know what would fix this? Less blood. Probably not, yet for centuries draining blood was a go-to medical solution. Tonight we uncover the haunting reasons medieval doctors were so convinced by this strange cure, bloodletting. If you enjoy diving into the peculiar past, please do like this video and subscribe for more. And hey, where are you listening from? And what time is it in your part of the world? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Close your eyes for a moment and let us drift back gently through the centuries. We arrive in the Middle Ages, a time quite unlike our own. The world felt vast, its edges uncharted, and the nights, lit only by moon, stars, or a flickering candle, held deep shadows and hushed stories. Life moved at a different, more deliberate pace, dictated by the slow turn of seasons and the rhythm of daylight. Understanding of the world was deeply woven with faith. The divine was perceived in every sunrise, every storm, every unexplained event. People looked to ancient traditions and church teachings to make sense of their lives, finding solace in a world often feeling unpredictable and mysterious. In this era, a quiet current of unease often ran beneath daily life. Imagine a time without modern science's reassurances, without the clear explanations we now accept. Famine could follow a bad harvest, conflict could erupt with little warning, and illness, when it struck, was a terrifying unknown. The why of suffering wasn't sought in microbes or genetics, but often in the spiritual or moral realm. Misfortune might be seen as divine displeasure, a true test of faith, or the work of unseen, malevolent forces. The natural world, while intimately known in its rhythms, held many inscrutable secrets, and explanations often leaned on the mystical, offering a different kind of solace. Knowledge, especially medical knowledge, was a guarded treasure, often rooted in the distant past. Writings of ancient physicians like Galen and Hippocrates, penned centuries before, were revered as near-sacred texts. Scholars pored over these dusty manuscripts, their interpretations shaping medical thought for generations. The Church, a center of learning, preserved texts and educated healers, sometimes filtering knowledge through theological doctrine. There was profound respect for established authority. Radically questioning the wisdom of the ancients or proposing new theories was slow to take root. Change, when it came, was often gradual, a subtle shift, not a revolution. So what was it like to be unwell then? Common ailments, now treated with simple remedies, could be serious, even dire. Persistent coughs lingered for weeks, worsening with the cold. Aches from hard physical labor were constant companions. Fevers could spike suddenly, their cause a mystery, their outcome uncertain. Skin conditions, from minor rashes to severe afflictions, were common with different hygiene standards. Injuries from accidents in fields or workshops could easily infect, with little understanding of prevention or treatment. Life was more fragile, especially for the young. Infant and child mortality rates were heartbreakingly high, a common sorrow. Beyond these daily discomforts, other troubles plagued medieval people. Imagine a throbbing toothache with no skilled dentist, or eyesight fading with no corrective lenses. Wounds festered, infections spread, grim realities. And then the ever-present dread of epidemics. Leprosy cast a long shadow of fear. But towering above all was the horror of the plague, the Black Death, sweeping across continents in devastating waves. Such experiences of widespread, inexplicable death deeply marked the medieval psyche, reinforcing the sense of a world governed by powerful, often terrifying forces beyond human control or comprehension, felt in every village and home. The human body itself was largely a mystery, a kind of black box. Though healers did their best, their understanding of anatomy and physiology was profoundly limited by today's standards. For much of the Middle Ages, direct examination of the body's interior via dissection was rare, often viewed with unease or prohibited by custom or religious sentiment. The medical theory relied heavily on abstract concepts, chiefly the ancient Greek idea of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was believed to depend on the perfect balance of these vital fluids, each linked to elements and qualities. Organs were understood not by precise functions, but in general terms related to these humors. Disease, therefore, was often seen not merely as a physical issue, but an enigma, perhaps a message, a trial, or punishment from a higher power. The search for cures reflected this complex worldview. Remedies blended practical experience, observation of what sometimes worked, and deep reliance on herbalism, with plants chosen for known or supposed properties. Prayer and appeals for divine intervention were vital to healing, and practices aimed at restoring humoral balance, like dietary changes, inducing sweating, or our story's focus, bloodletting, became central to medicine. It was a world desperately seeking relief, trying to decode illness with the beliefs and tools they had, hoping for a gentle return to health. Tonight, as we delve deeper into the medieval medical world, we encounter Humorism, a theory so fundamental it shaped health understanding for generations. Imagine it as the bedrock of medical thought, an enduring cornerstone, largely unchanged for many long centuries. It was the lens through which physicians, scholars, and ordinary people perceived the body's delicate inner workings. This ancient system provided a known framework to comprehend wellness mysteries and illness's unsettling arrival. It was a belief-seeking order in the often chaotic human experience of being alive, a guiding, constant light for all who sought relief from their suffering and wished for gentle health and quiet peace. Humorism's roots stretch to antiquity, from Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, whose writings became ultimate medical authority through the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and into the 19th century. For over 2 millennia, this single powerful theory largely dominated Western medicine. It wasn't a mere footnote, it was the guiding principle for healers. Its influence extended beyond diagnosing ailments. It informed treatment, diet, lifestyle, and understanding of temperaments. It was a complete and seemingly elegant system, offering comprehensive views on the body and its many intricate processes, a detailed map for a mysterious and often unpredictable internal terrain. Humorism's heart lay a simple yet profound concept: internal balance. The human body, it was believed, held 4 primary fluids, essential liquids known as humors. These were vital substances governing health, disposition, and physical constitution. According to ancient understanding, when these 4 humors existed in perfect harmony, in correct proportion, a person experienced good health, true equilibrium. But if this delicate balance was disturbed by excess or deficiency of any humor, illness was the inevitable, unwelcome result. So medical practice revolved around restoring this crucial internal balance of these essential bodily fluids with gentle care and thoughtful attention to detail. So what were these 4 fundamental fluids, these influential humors that held such sway over life and health in medieval thought? There were precisely 4 of them, each distinct, each with its own inherent nature and its own specific role to play within the body's complex internal landscape. These were believed to be real, tangible components of every human being. Learning their names is the very first step into understanding this ancient medical world. They were blood, the first and often most readily considered humor. Then there was phlegm, a cooler essence. Following these came yellow bile, fiery and sharp. And finally there was black bile, often associated with melancholy and the earth. These 4, in their intricate, unending dance, defined all states of health. Let us now consider the first of these vital fluids: blood. In the system of humorism, blood was often seen as the most important, or at least the most immediately vibrant, of the 4 humors. Its presence was so obvious, its natural warmth readily associated with life itself. When a person was full of vigor, with a healthy, rosy complexion, it was thought that their blood was plentiful and also well-balanced. It was the very fluid of vitality, of boundless energy, of a spirited and lively nature. Medieval physicians paid extremely close attention to blood's quality and quantity, believing it a primary indicator of an individual's overall state of being. This warm, flowing substance was deemed utterly central to being alive. According to the ancient theory of humorism, each humor possessed 2 primary qualities, a specific combination of hot or cold and wet or dry. Blood, this vital fluid we have just introduced, was always understood to be inherently hot and also inherently wet. Imagine the comforting warmth of a healthy body, the essential moistness of fresh blood. These palpable sensations informed this important classification. This hot quality did not necessarily mean feverish, but indicated its energetic, active nature. The wet quality spoke to its fluidity, its ability to flow and to nourish all parts of the body. So whenever medieval doctors thought of blood, they intrinsically linked it with these core qualities of heat and life-giving moisture. The thinkers of old loved to see connections, to find deep patterns that linked the microcosm of the human body to the macrocosm of the universe. And so, each humor, with its distinct qualities, was carefully associated with one of the 4 classical elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Blood, being hot and wet, found its natural correspondence with the element of air. Air, much like blood, was perceived as fundamentally life-sustaining. Air can be warm, it can carry moisture, and it is always in motion, vital and diffuse. This elemental association helped to truly solidify blood's role as a dynamic, energetic force within the physical body. The very breath of life, carried by air, seemed to echo blood's gentle circulation through the veins. Just as the humors were linked to elements, they were also meaningfully connected to the seasons of the year, each season believed to favor or increase the prevalence of its corresponding humor. For blood, with its qualities of hot and wet and its association with the element air, the season in which it was thought to be most dominant was gentle spring. Spring is a time of renewal, of burgeoning life, of warmth returning after cold, and of soft, nourishing rain. This atmosphere of growth and temperate warmth perfectly mirrored the perceived nature of blood. It was believed that in springtime, blood was naturally more abundant, influencing vitality and mood, making one perhaps more optimistic and certainly more energetic. Moving from the warmth and evident vitality of blood, we now turn our quiet attention to the second of the four humors, phlegm. In the ancient system of Humorism, phlegm represented a truly different aspect of the body's internal environment. It was not seen with the same immediate vibrancy as blood, but it held its own crucial place in the delicate humoral balance that maintained all health and well-being. Phlegm was generally associated with the cooler, more watery aspects of the body. Think of the clear fluids that soothe, or the mucus that protects certain internal passages from harm. While an excess could lead to sluggishness, in proper measure phlegm was quite essential for lubrication and for tempering any excessive internal heat. As we explored with blood, each humor was defined by a pair of fundamental qualities. For phlegm, these qualities were understood to be cold and wet. This contrasted directly with blood's heat, offering a natural cooling counterpoint within the bodily system. The cold aspect of phlegm did not mean icy, but rather a distinct lack of the fiery energy associated with other, more ardent humors. It suggested a more passive, calm, and tranquil nature. The wet quality was quite literal, linking phlegm to the body's natural moisture, its fluids that were not warm like blood. This combination of cold and wet defined phlegm's essential role in its many subtle cooling influences on the body's internal climate. A gentle presence, while an overabundance of phlegm was often associated with ailments characterized by sluggishness, deep lethargy, or excessive discharges, it's important to remember that in the theory of Humorism, phlegm, in proper balance, played a vital, truly positive role in maintaining health. Its cool and moist nature was believed to be essential for lubricating the joints, allowing for smooth and easy, unimpeded movement throughout the body. It was also thought to gently nourish the brain, which itself was often considered a cool and moist organ by these ancient thinkers. Furthermore, phlegm helped to temper the potentially excessive heat of a humor like blood, or the fiery yellow bile, a most valuable function. Continuing our exploration of the connections between the microcosm of the body and the macrocosm of the world, phlegm, with its inherent qualities of being cold and wet, was naturally associated with the element of water. Water, in its many forms, is characteristically cool to the touch. It is the very epitome of wetness, of fluidity. It nourishes life, it gently cleanses, and it can be calm and still, like a deep, reflective pool, or it can flow with quiet persistence. This elemental link strongly reinforced the understanding of phlegm's role within the body, a vital fluid that cools, consistently moistens, and sustains in its own quiet, unassuming way. Thus, phlegm was intrinsically of the water, a soothing internal sea for the body. The cycle of the seasons also played its part in the overarching humoral theory, with each season believed to influence one of the four humors. For phlegm, characterized by its cold and wet nature and its link to the element water, the dominant season was, quite naturally, winter. Winter is the time of year when the world outside grows cold, when moisture might fall as snow or as chill rain, and when nature itself seems to slow down, becoming more dormant and deeply still. This atmosphere of coolness, prevailing dampness, and reduced activity was seen as being perfectly aligned with the fundamental nature of phlegm. It was thought phlegm might naturally increase in the quiet winter months, requiring gentle care. Our journey through the four humors now brings us to a substance quite different in nature from both blood and phlegm. This is yellow bile, the third of these vital fluids. In the humoral system, yellow bile represented a fiery, active, and sometimes harsh principle within the body. It was directly associated with digestion, with the potent power to break down food, but also with qualities of sharpness and distinct irritability if it became excessive in the system. Unlike the gentle warmth of blood or the inherent coolness of phlegm, yellow bile was perceived as genuinely hot and noticeably acrid. Its presence was necessary, medieval physicians firmly believed, for certain bodily processes, but it was a humor that needed to be kept in very careful check. Each humor, as we have learned, is characterized by a distinct pair of qualities. For yellow bile, this energetic and sometimes volatile fluid, these defining qualities were unequivocally hot and dry. The hot aspect was certainly more intense than the mere warmth of blood. It was a consuming heat much like fire itself. This aligned with its supposed role in metabolic processes, the cooking of food within the stomach. The dry quality was equally important, contrasting with the pervasive moisture of blood and phlegm. This dryness could be associated with conditions of parchedness, uncomfortable inflammation, or a sharp, irritable temperament if yellow bile was too dominant a force within the individual's sensitive system. Though often associated with choleric temperaments and various inflammatory conditions when in excess, yellow bile, when present in its correct and balanced proportion, was understood to fulfill essential functions within the body. Its hot and dry nature was thought to be crucial for proper digestion, aiding in the thorough breakdown and assimilation of nutrients from ingested food. It was also believed to stimulate appetite and to help maintain the body's overall energy levels, providing a certain sharpness and valued quickness of mind and physical action. Furthermore, yellow bile was thought to help cleanse the body of certain impurities and to maintain the necessary internal warmth that was required for many various physiological processes. In the grand scheme of elemental correspondences that so fascinated medieval thinkers, yellow bile, with its defining characteristics of being intensely hot and notably dry, was unequivocally linked to the element of fire. Fire is the very essence of heat, and it actively consumes moisture, leaving pronounced dryness in its wake. It is energetic, truly transformative, and can be both purifying and, at times, destructive if uncontrolled. This clear association with fire deeply informed the understanding of yellow bile's physiological role. It was seen as the body's own internal fire, responsible for the vital heat of metabolism and for a certain spirited, fiery disposition in individuals, a potent force of internal animation. Following the pattern of seasonal influence on the humors, yellow bile, being hot and dry and aligned with the element of fire, naturally found its period of dominance in the long season of summer. Summer is the time of greatest heat, when the sun beats down relentlessly and the land can become very dry and parched under its gaze. This external environment, with its prevalent warmth and pervasive dryness, was believed to resonate with and actively encourage the production or heightened activity of yellow bile within the human body. Consequently, it was thought that individuals might be more prone to ailments associated with an excess of yellow bile during the warm summer months, requiring awareness. Finally, we arrive at the fourth and last of the humors in this ancient enduring system, black bile. This humor is perhaps the most enigmatic and often misunderstood of the entire quartet of vital fluids. Black bile was associated with coolness and with dryness, and it carried distinct connotations of melancholy, of seriousness, and of a deeply reflective nature. Unlike the fiery energy of yellow bile or the inherent vitality of blood, black bile was a more subdued, truly grounding influence within the body. It was thought to be a heavy, somewhat dense fluid, and while an excess was linked to feelings of profound sadness or even despair, in its proper measure it contributed to stability and deep thought. The defining qualities attributed to black bile, this contemplative and sometimes somber humor, were understood to be cold and dry. This particular pairing set it apart from the other three humors in a significant and noticeable way. Its cold nature, similar in some respects to Phlegm's, signified a lack of inherent warmth or energetic fire, suggesting a slower, more passive influence on the body's functions. The dry quality which it shared with yellow bile indicated a fundamental lack of moisture. But combined with coldness, it evoked a different kind of dryness, perhaps like the subtle dryness of earth or fine dust, rather than the intense, heat-induced dryness of fire. This particular combination was foundational to its effects. While an overabundance of black bile was widely associated with melancholy, with persistent fear and a host of digestive and other physical complaints, it is crucial to understand that within the humoral framework, black bile in a balanced state was considered necessary and even decidedly beneficial for overall health. Its cold and dry nature was thought to provide a certain stability and an essential firmness to the body's tissues and structures. It was also believed to aid in important processes like the natural thickening of blood and the gradual formation of bones. Furthermore, a well-tempered amount of black bile was closely associated with positive intellectual traits, such as profoundness of thought and deep, unwavering focus. In the symbolic tapestry that so beautifully connected the humors to the vast natural world, Black bile, with its fundamental qualities of being cold and dry, was intrinsically and deeply linked to the element of earth. Earth is the ultimate representation of coolness, of dryness, of profound stability, and of enduring solidity. It is grounding, it is foundational, and in some aspects it can indeed feel melancholic or heavy in its pervasive presence. This clear, elemental correspondence helped to explain the perceived nature of black bile. It was seen as the humor that connected the human body to the more dense, more stable aspects of all existence, providing a firm, reliable anchor against the shifting tides of other humors. Completing the cycle of seasonal influences upon the humors, black bile, characterized by its cold and dry qualities and its close association with the element earth, was believed to be most prevalent or particularly active during the transitional season of autumn. Autumn is a time when the warmth of summer noticeably fades, giving way to cooler temperatures across the land. It is often a drier period before the full onset of winter wetness, and it is a time when nature itself begins to recede. Leaves fall from the trees, and a certain quiet melancholy can pervade the very air. This atmosphere of cooling, drying, and gentle reflection was seen as perfectly harmonious with the deep, introspective nature of black bile. Thus, we have explored the four humors: blood, always hot and wet; phlegm, forever cold and wet; yellow bile, fiercely hot and dry; and finally black bile, which was cold and dry, each with its own unique qualities, its elemental and seasonal links, and its absolutely vital role when in perfect harmony within the body. The absolute cornerstone of humoral theory, the core principle that guided virtually all medical diagnosis and subsequent treatment for many long centuries, was precisely this. Illness, in nearly all its varied forms, was firmly believed to arise from an imbalance among these four essential bodily fluids. If one humor became excessive, or perhaps deficient, or if its quality was corrupted, the body's delicate equilibrium, its eucrasia, would be lost. This state of imbalance, dyscrasia, was truly the definition of disease itself. As we settle into our exploration of past medical practices, let us gently recall the foundational belief that governed nearly all medical thought for centuries: humorism, a quiet melody beneath all healing arts. We remember those four essential fluids believed to reside within us: warm, moist blood, full of life; cool, wet phlegm, offering calm; hot, dry, yellow bile, sparking energy; and cold, dry, black bile, grounding our being. These were not mere abstract concepts for people then, but tangible, flowing substances, the very essence of our physical and temperamental selves. Their harmonious balance, a state of perfect, undisturbed equilibrium, was synonymous with health, with vitality, with life unfolding smoothly, day by day, in quiet comfort and sustained ease, a gentle river of well-being and inner peace. Indeed, this cherished idea of harmony was paramount in their understanding of the body. Medieval physicians, and many people of the time, from scholar to villager, understood health not as the absence of specific germs, for such things were unknown, but as this delicate internal symphony of the four humors, playing in perfect concert. Each humor needed to be present in its correct God-given proportion, its quality pure and untainted. Illness, therefore, was perceived as a distinct disruption of this vital harmony, a form of internal discord, a jarring note in the body's song. It meant one humor, or more, had fallen out of its natural balance, becoming too abundant, deficient, or somehow corrupted from its intended pristine state. This was the universal lens through which all sickness was then viewed and interpreted by almost everyone. Faced with a patient suffering such an imbalance, the medieval physician's primary goal was clear, guiding their every action. Their task, their solemn duty, was to help the body restore its lost equilibrium, its precious inner peace. If health was balance, a finely tuned instrument, then healing was the careful process of gently coaxing the humors back into their rightful proportions. But how was this achieved practically? What tools, what methods, did they possess to intervene in this delicate internal dance of vital fluids? They sought ways to reduce an overabundant humor, or strengthen one perceived as lacking, always aiming to guide the body back to its natural, healthy state of balanced functioning. A return to peaceful internal order, where all systems could work as intended by the Creator. Among the various methods employed by physicians to restore this crucial humoral balance, one particular treatment stood out, towering above others in its frequency of use and perceived importance: bloodletting, also known as phlebotomy. For centuries, from royalty's grand halls to the humblest village dwellings where common folks suffered, the deliberate, methodical removal of a patient's blood was not just a common medical intervention, It was often the primary, almost instinctive go-to remedy for an astonishingly wide array of ailments, great and small. It was an undeniable cornerstone of medical practice, a familiar, if perhaps unsettling, healing ritual, performed across the known medieval world by nearly all practitioners of the healing arts. Now, to our modern sensibilities, steeped in different physiological understanding, draining precious blood to cure sickness might seem counterintuitive, even alarming. But to understand its profound prevalence, we must endeavor to step into the medieval mindset, to see the world through humorism's pervasive lens. Why was blood so very often the target of this specific intervention, this controlled release? Firstly, blood was the most visible, most obviously vital and energetic of the four humors. Its rich red color, its palpable warmth when freshly drawn, its undeniable association with life, spirit, and vigor made it seem particularly potent. An excess of such a powerful, life-giving fluid, it was reasoned, could surely cause significant disruption within the body's delicate internal systems and overall harmony. Furthermore, many common symptoms of illness, those outward signs of internal distress, seemed to directly indicate an overabundance or plethora of blood, or at least a troublesome excess of heat, which was so strongly associated with the sanguine humor, with blood itself. Consider a raging fever, the patient's skin hot, their face flushed a deep crimson, their pulse often racing. To the medieval physician observing these signs, this intense heat clearly signaled an excess of the hot and wet humor, blood. Similarly, conditions involving pronounced redness, uncomfortable swelling, and throbbing inflammation were readily and confidently interpreted as clear signs that too much blood had accumulated in a particular area, causing considerable pain and noticeable bodily dysfunction. Even if another humor, perhaps fiery yellow bile or cold heavy black bile, was suspected as the primary cause of imbalance, blood still often became the focus of treatment. It was widely believed humors could mix and mingle extensively within the body's vessels, one corrupting another. An excess of yellow bile, for instance, might make blood too hot or acrid. Therefore, by removing some blood, the physician might also hope to draw out a portion of the offending humor that had corrupted it. Moreover, from a practical standpoint, blood was relatively easy to access compared to other, more hidden humors. Veins were often visible or palpable beneath the skin, making phlebotomy a direct way to interact with the body's internal fluid environment, a tangible intervention they could readily perform with the tools at hand. The fundamental logic behind bloodletting, then, viewed through that era's understanding, was deceptively simple, yet deeply rooted in humorism's core principles. If illness was caused by an imbalance of the body's essential humors, specifically an excess of one or more vital fluids, then the most direct, obvious way to restore balance was to physically remove that perceived excess. It was a subtractive approach, a tangible, physical reduction of the offending substance thought to cause the malady. If the body contained too much blood, or blood that had become corrupted, too thick, or too hot, then letting some out seemed a perfectly rational, even necessary step towards restoring health and alleviating the patient's manifest suffering and discomfort. It is truly crucial for us, looking back across centuries from our modern vantage point with its vastly different medical knowledge, to understand that bloodletting was not viewed as haphazard or irrational cruelty, born of sheer ignorance alone. Within the accepted, revered context of humoral theory, it was a practice possessing its own clear internal logic, a sensible conclusion drawn from their best, earnest understanding of how the human body worked and what caused it to fail. If one accepted the premise that health depended entirely on humoral balance, and that illness frequently stemmed from an excess of one humor, then removing a portion of that excess seemed not only reasonable, but also a necessary and potentially highly beneficial intervention for the sick individual, a true act of healing. The ultimate aim of bloodletting, as with all humoral treatments, was always to gently assist the body in returning to its natural God-given state of eucrasia, the good mixture of its humors. Medieval physicians generally believed the body possessed a natural tendency towards health, towards this essential equilibrium, a concept known as vis medicatrix naturae, nature's healing power. Bloodletting was thus seen as a way to remove an obstacle, lighten the body's burden, thereby allowing its own inherent healing capacities and vital forces to function more effectively and bring about recovery. By reducing the supposedly overabundant humor, they sincerely hoped to create optimal conditions under which the remaining humors could naturally redistribute and rebalance themselves within the patient's delicate system. Given this underlying logic, which seemed so sound to them, it's perhaps less surprising bloodletting was applied to such an incredibly vast spectrum of conditions, from mild discomforts to life-threatening diseases. It wasn't reserved for just a few ailments, as a modern targeted therapy might be. Fevers of all kinds, persistent headaches, painful inflammations, frightening convulsions, deep melancholy, unsettling mania, labored breathing, digestive upsets, even physical injuries, virtually any significant illness could, and often did, prompt a physician to prescribe bloodletting. If diagnosis pointed towards an excess of any humor, bloodletting was a primary consideration for immediate relief and gradual, hopeful healing of the afflicted person. Therefore, bloodletting solidified its esteemed position as the preeminent, almost universal go-to remedy in the entire medieval medical arsenal, a trusted friend in times of dire sickness. It was a practice underpinned by centuries of accepted medical theory, continually reinforced by daily observation. Interpreted, of course, through the humoral lens and faithfully passed down through revered ancient medical texts from authorities like Galen. When a patient fell ill, the question was often not whether to bleed, but how much blood to take, from what location, and at which specific time, sometimes meticulously considering astrological influences for optimal effect. Its status was largely unquestioned by most, a standard of care for many long ages. In our quiet journey through the healing practices of bygone eras, we now arrive at the most widely employed method of bloodletting, a procedure known as Venisection. This term, Venisection, simply means the cutting of a vein, a direct and purposeful opening into the body's network of flowing lifeblood. For countless physicians and healers across the medieval world and beyond, this was the principal way they sought to enact the theories of Humorism, to gently coax the body back towards that ever-desired state of internal balance. It was a familiar ritual, a common path taken in the hope of alleviating suffering and restoring the gentle equilibrium that signified health and peace within the individual. The underlying intention of Venisection was always rooted in that core belief that illness often arose from an excess, a plethora, of one or more of the body's vital humors, particularly the blood itself, or blood that had become tainted by another humor in distress. Therefore, the act of opening a vein was seen as a measured release, a careful letting out of this surplus, this burden that was thought to be weighing down the patient and disrupting their natural harmony. It was not a haphazard draining, but ideally a considered intervention, designed to lighten the body's load and allow its own natural healing energies to resurface and to mend what was amiss, restoring the gentle flow of well-being, a soft return to ease. The process of Venisection would begin with the physician's careful consideration, their gaze resting upon the patient, their mind sifting through the knowledge passed down through ancient texts and personal experience. A crucial first step was the selection of the vein from which the blood would be drawn. This was not an arbitrary choice. Different veins were thought to have different connections to various parts of the body or to influence specific humors or organs. The physician would observe the patient, note their symptoms, and perhaps gently palpate, feeling for a suitable vessel that seemed prominent or appropriate for the task at hand. A quiet assessment before the procedure truly began. Among the most frequently chosen sites for Venisection was the inner aspect of the elbow, specifically the median cubital vein. This vein, often visible or easily felt in the bend of the arm, was a common target, familiar to practitioners. Its accessibility made it a practical choice, and it was believed to have a general effect on the entire system, a good starting point for rebalancing the humors throughout the body. The patient's arm would be positioned comfortably, perhaps resting upon a cushion, as the physician prepared for this very common and accepted form of intervention. A routine step in the art of medieval healing, performed countless times in rooms quiet and still. Beyond the prominent veins of the inner elbow, other sites on the body were also commonly selected for Venisection, depending on the specific condition being treated or the traditions followed by the practitioner. The veins of the ankle or the top of the foot were frequently chosen, particularly for ailments believed to affect the lower parts of the body, or to draw humors downwards, away from the head or vital organs. It was thought that drawing blood from a site distant from but connected to an afflicted area could relieve congestion or draw out the malevolent humors that had settled there, a gentle redirection of the body's internal streams, seeking to restore a more even distribution of these vital fluids. For conditions affecting the head, such as severe headaches, dizziness, or afflictions of the eyes and ears, physicians might choose to perform Venisection on the forehead or at the temples. Small veins in these areas, though perhaps requiring a more delicate touch, were believed to offer direct relief for complaints centered in the uppermost part of the body. The thinking was that by letting blood from near the site of the ailment, the corrupt or excessive humors causing the distress could be more immediately evacuated, bringing quicker solace to the suffering patient. This localized approach was part of the nuanced application of the broader theory, a targeted release intended for specific upper body concerns. Once the site for Venisection had been carefully chosen, the physician or surgeon would begin the quiet preparations for the procedure itself. This involved the meticulous gathering of their specific tools, each one designed for its part in this ancient ritual of healing. These implements would be laid out, perhaps on a clean linen cloth, ready at hand. There would be the sharp cutting instrument, the means to control the blood flow, and a vessel to receive the blood that was to be let. The atmosphere in the room might be one of focused calm, the practitioner preparing themselves mentally as well as physically for the task, a moment of stillness before the action commenced. The patient, too, would be prepared, often positioned comfortably, either sitting or reclining, to allow easy access to the chosen vein and to ensure their stability during the procedure. There might be words of quiet reassurance from the physician or perhaps a shared understanding of the necessity and accepted nature of the treatment. In an age before anesthetics, the patient's calm and cooperation were important. The room would be kept adequately lit, perhaps by natural daylight streaming through a window or by the steady glow of candlelight if the hour was late, casting gentle shadows as the physician made their final checks, ensuring everything was in its proper place, ready for the work ahead. Let us now turn our attention to the specific tools used for Venisection, these instruments that were so central to the physician's ability to perform this common procedure. One of the most ubiquitous tools was the lancet. Imagine a small, slender instrument, its defining feature being a very sharp, often double-edged blade, tapering to a fine, clean point. This blade was designed for precision, for making a small, clean incision into the skin and the wall of the vein beneath. The lancet was the key that would unlock the flow of blood, the instrument that initiated the process of release, held with a steady and practiced hand. Lancets varied somewhat in their specific form, but the essential design remained consistent. The blade itself was typically crafted from good quality steel, carefully ground and honed to maintain its sharpness, for a clean cut was believed to be important for both the efficacy of the bleeding and the comfort of the patient. This sharp steel blade was often set into a handle, which could be made from a variety of materials such as polished wood, carved ivory, bone, or even ornate metal like silver. The handle provided the physician with a secure grip, allowing for the precise control necessary when making the delicate incision. It was a tool of purpose, simple yet effective in its design. The lancet was, in essence, a surgical knife of miniature proportions, its singular purpose being to make that small, precise opening in the vein. It was not a tool for deep or extensive cutting, but rather for a shallow, well-aimed puncture or slice. The physician, wielding the lancet, would approach the chosen site with focused intent, the polished steel perhaps glinting softly in the light. The sharpness of its point and edges was paramount, ensuring that the vein could be accessed with minimal tearing or bruising of the surrounding tissues. It was an instrument of release, designed to allow the excess humor, the blood, to begin its journey out from the confines of the body, a tiny key to open a vital channel. Alongside the slender lancet, another instrument commonly employed for venesection, particularly by barber surgeons or for bleeding larger animals, though also used on humans, was the Phlegm. The Phlegm was a different kind of cutting tool, distinct in its appearance and sometimes in its method of use. Often a Phlegm consisted of a handle from which one or more small, flat, usually triangular or V-shaped blades could be folded out, somewhat like the blades of a pocket knife. Each blade would have a very sharp, precisely angled point, designed to make a specific type of incision suitable for letting blood. It was a robust tool, ready for its task. Fleams might possess several blades of different sizes, allowing the practitioner to select the one most appropriate for the vein being targeted, or the amount of blood intended to be drawn. These blades, when not in use, would fold neatly back into the handle, protecting their sharp edges. The handle itself was often sturdy, made of brass, steel, or horn, providing a good grip. Some Fleams were single-bladed, fixed in their handle, but the multi-bladed folding type offered greater versatility. A Phlegm was a common sight in the medical kits of the era, a familiar instrument for this very routine procedure, a testament to the widespread nature of bloodletting across society. The technique for using a Phlegm often differed from that of the lancet. While a lancet was typically used with a direct controlled slicing or piercing motion, the Phlegm was often placed carefully over the selected vein, its sharp point positioned precisely. Then, the back of the blade or a flattened part of its shank would be struck a quick, sharp blow. This strike was sometimes delivered with a small, dedicated mallet or stick, often called a Phlegm stick or blood stick. This percussive action would drive the Phlegm's point through the skin and into the vein, creating the necessary opening for the blood to flow. It was a method requiring a steady hand and a confident, quick action. Let us now return to the quiet room, the physician poised, tool in hand, be it the delicate lancet or the sturdy Phlegm. If a ligature, a strip of cloth perhaps, had been tied gently but firmly around the limb above the chosen site, the vein below would now be slightly more prominent, swollen softly with the detained blood, easier to discern. The physician would locate the precise spot, perhaps with a final light touch of a fingertip. Then, with practiced calm and focused attention, the incision would be made. A swift, small movement. A shallow parting of the skin, a tiny gateway opened into the vessel beneath. It was a moment of release, the beginning of the flow, the start of the body's supposed rebalancing. Following that small decisive action, the first sign of success would be the appearance of the blood itself. Initially, it might be just a dark bead welling up from the tiny opening. Then, as the pressure within the vein asserted itself, this bead would transform into a slow, steady trickle, or perhaps a more Coldker-flowing stream, depending on the size of the vein and the nature of the incision. The color of the blood, often a deep, rich crimson, would be observed by the physician. Its warmth, too, was a palpable reminder of the life force it represented, now being gently guided out from the body in a controlled manner. A visible sign of the treatment underway. As the blood began to flow, it was essential to collect it, both to measure the quantity being let and often to observe its qualities. For this purpose, a special bowl was used. These bloodletting bowls were common implements, often crafted from metal such as pewter, brass, or sometimes even silver for wealthier clients. Ceramic bowls were also used. They were typically shallow and wide, designed to catch the flow efficiently and allow the physician to monitor the process. The bowl would be held steadily beneath the site of the incision, or the patient's limb positioned so the blood flowed directly into it, a silent witness to the procedure. Imagine the scene, the quiet room, the still patient, the focused physician, and the dark, warm blood flowing steadily from the small incision, arcing or dripping into the waiting bowl. The level of blood in the bowl would slowly rise, a visual measure of how much of this vital fluid was being removed. The physician would watch this process intently, their experience guiding them as to when an adequate amount had been let. Sometimes the bowls themselves had markings on the inside indicating specific volumes, aiding the practitioner in their judgment. The sight of the blood accumulating was a key part of the ritual, a tangible sign of the excess humor being drawn away from the patient's overburdened system. Beyond simply measuring the quantity, medieval physicians often paid close attention to the perceived qualities of the blood as it flowed and as it settled in the bowl. They would observe its color. Was it a healthy, bright red, or darker, almost black, suggesting a corruption or an excess of black bile mixed within? They noted its consistency. Did it flow freely, or was it thick and sluggish, perhaps indicating an abundance of phlegm? Sometimes, as the blood cooled and coagulated in the bowl, they would examine the layers that formed, believing these, too, offered clues about the nature of the patient's humoral imbalance. These observations, however subjective, formed part of their diagnostic and prognostic assessment. In the stillness of the room, punctuated perhaps only by the physician's calm breathing or a soft word, the sounds of the Venisection itself would be subtle but present. There might be the gentle, almost rhythmic dripping of the blood as it fell from the limb into the collecting bowl. Or, if the flow was stronger, a soft, continuous trickling sound. A liquid murmur. These quiet sounds, combined with the visual of the flowing blood, could contribute to the almost hypnotic, ritualistic nature of the procedure. A focused, sensory experience for both the patient, if they were observing, and the practitioner. It was the sound of the body rebalancing, according to their understanding, a gentle release of internal pressures. For the patient, the physical sensations would vary, the initial small sting of the incision quickly passing, perhaps a feeling of warmth as the blood flowed out. Some accounts from later periods, when patients described their experiences, speak of a feeling of lightheadedness as a significant amount of blood was removed, or sometimes a sense of faintness. However, within the context of their beliefs, many patients likely anticipated and even welcomed the procedure, trusting in their physician and the accepted wisdom that this release would bring relief from their suffering, a perceived lightening of their physical and humoral burden, a step towards the restoration of their health and tranquility, a much-desired comfort. When the physician judged that a sufficient quantity of blood had been let, a decision based on the patient's condition, the amount of blood collected, and sometimes changes in the patient's pulse or perceived state, the next step was to stop the flow. If a ligature had been used, it would now be gently untied or loosened, reducing the pressure in the vein. The physician would then apply direct pressure to the small incision site, perhaps using a clean piece of linen or a soft pad of material. This pressure would be maintained for a few moments, allowing the body's natural clotting mechanisms, though not understood as such, to begin their work and seal the tiny opening in the vein wall. Once the bleeding had ceased, a simple dressing might be applied to the site. This could be a small piece of clean linen cloth, perhaps held in place with a bandage or a strip of plaster if available. The aim was simply to protect the small wound as it healed and to prevent any further minor oozing. With this final touch, the Venisection procedure was complete. The collected blood might be examined further or simply discarded. The physician would then offer any post-procedure advice, and the patient would be left to rest, with the hope and expectation that this ancient ritual of release had set them firmly on the path towards recovery, towards the gentle restoration of their body's harmonious balance. As our journey into historical healing continues, we focus on another ancient practice, cupping. This technique, employed for thousands of years across diverse cultures, offered a different approach to influencing the body's humors compared to direct Venisection. Cupping, in essence, involved applying special cups to the skin, creating a vacuum, a gentle suction, to draw fluids towards the surface, or in some cases out of the body. It was a practice deeply intertwined with the desire to restore balance and alleviate discomfort. A familiar touch in the healer's repertoire, used with solemn care and gentle precision for many generations of people seeking relief. This ancient art of cupping generally followed two distinct paths, two variations on a central theme of using suction for therapeutic ends: dry cupping and wet cupping. Dry cupping, the gentler of the two, involved placing suction cups upon unbroken skin, aiming to draw blood and humors towards that area to encourage circulation or dispel bad air or internal stagnation. Wet cupping, however, was a more direct form of bloodletting, where the skin would first be lightly broken with small incisions before cups were applied to draw out a quantity of blood. Both methods shared fundamental tools and the philosophy of restoring healthful equilibrium and promoting internal calm. Let us consider for a moment the cups themselves, these simple yet versatile instruments that were the heart of the cupping procedure. Throughout history and across various lands, cupping vessels were crafted from a surprising array of materials, each with its own particular feel and history. Some of the earliest cups were made from hollowed-out animal horns, their natural shape lending itself well to the task. Sections of bamboo, with their smooth cylindrical form, were also widely used, particularly in Eastern traditions. As craftsmanship evolved, cups of ceramic, pottery, bronze, and eventually glass became more common, each offering different properties of durability and ease of use, silent partners in this ancient ritual. The shapes of these cups could also vary, though a common form was a rounded, bell-like shape, or a more straight-sided cylindrical vessel, often with a smooth, thickened rim to help create a comfortable and effective seal against the patient's skin. Sizes ranged from small cups, perhaps just an inch or so in diameter for use on smaller areas or for more delicate work, to larger cups several inches across, capable of covering a broader expanse of the back or limbs. Before use, particularly a glass or metal cup might feel cool and smooth to the touch, a silent, waiting instrument, soon to be warmed and brought to life by the practitioner's art, ready to perform its gentle pulling duty. We begin our closer look with dry cupping, a method that did not involve the drawing of blood out of the body, but rather aimed to influence the humors and blood flow beneath the skin. The core principle of dry cupping was the creation of a partial vacuum inside the cup before or as it was applied to the skin's surface. This reduction in air pressure within the cup would then cause the skin and the superficial muscle layer to be gently drawn upwards into the cup's embrace. This suction was believed to stimulate the area, to draw stagnant humors towards the surface for dispersal, and to promote a healthier flow of vital energies through the tissues, a subtle but powerful invitation for release. The most common method for creating this necessary vacuum, particularly with glass, ceramic, or horn cups, involved the use of fire, a swift, controlled application of heat. The practitioner might take a flammable material such as a small piece of cotton, perhaps, soaked in alcohol, or a paper taper, ignite it, and then quickly insert this small flame into the inverted cup for just a brief moment. The flame would consume some of the oxygen and heat the remaining air inside. Then, just as quickly, the flame would be withdrawn and the cup immediately placed onto the selected area of the patient's skin. This heating and rapid placement was a practiced fluid motion indeed. The placement of the heated cup onto the skin had to be done with swiftness and precision. As the hot air inside the cup began to cool upon contact with the relatively cooler skin in the ambient air, it would contract, thereby reducing the pressure within the cup compared to the pressure outside. This difference in pressure is what created the suction, the gentle but firm vacuum that would draw the skin upwards, A good seal between the rim of the cup and the skin was essential for this process to work effectively. The practitioner would press the cup firmly for a moment, ensuring it adhered snugly, ready to begin its quiet work of drawing and pulling. For the patient undergoing dry cupping, the initial sensation as the cup was applied would often be one of gentle, spreading warmth emanating from the heated rim and the air trapped within. This warmth itself could be soothing, relaxing the muscles in the area even before the full effect of the suction was felt. As the air cooled further and the vacuum strengthened, this warmth would be joined by a distinct pulling or tugging sensation. It was as if a gentle hand were lifting the skin and the tissues just beneath it, a persistent, drawing pressure that was noticeable, yet typically not described as sharply painful, more a strong, insistent embrace. As the cup remained in place, drawing tissues upward, visible changes would often occur on the skin beneath. The area directly under the cup's rim might become reddened, flushed with blood drawn to the surface. Sometimes the skin pulled up into the cup would take on a darker hue, perhaps purplish or deep red, a phenomenon known as hyperemia. This discoloration was often interpreted by practitioners and patients as a positive sign, an indication that stagnant blood, bad humors, or toxins were being successfully drawn from deeper tissues towards the surface, where they could be more easily resolved by the body's natural processes. It was a clear visual confirmation of the cup's gentle, effective action. The feeling of pressure from dry cupping could be quite significant, especially if a strong vacuum was created or if multiple cups were applied. Yet, this pressure was often described in terms of a deep massage, a powerful kneading of the tissues. For individuals suffering from muscle stiffness, aches, or what they perceived as trapped wind or coldness in their bodies, this drawing sensation could also bring a sense of release, a feeling of lightness or openness in the treated area once the cups were removed. The cups might be left in place for several minutes, perhaps 5 to 15, allowing the gentle, persistent pull to work its perceived magic on the tissues below, a quiet interlude. The perceived purposes of dry cupping were manifold within the humoral framework and traditional medical systems. It was commonly used to alleviate pain, particularly musculoskeletal aches in the back, shoulders, or limbs, by supposedly drawing out painful humors, or by relaxing tense muscles through increased local blood flow. It was also thought to treat respiratory conditions like coughs or asthma by applying cups to the chest or back, aiming to clear congestion or dispel coldness from the lungs. Furthermore, dry cupping could be employed to stimulate areas where circulation was considered sluggish, invigorating the flow of vital energies, thereby promoting overall well-being and restoring a sense of true internal harmony and ease. Dry cupping could be utilized as a standalone therapy, sufficient in itself for certain conditions or for individuals who preferred a less invasive approach. The marks left by the cups, those circular areas of redness or bruising, would typically fade over a few days, seen by some as evidence of the toxins that had been brought to the surface and were now dissipating. In other instances, dry cupping served as a diagnostic tool or a preparatory step for wet cupping. The practitioner might observe the intensity of the skin's reaction under the dry cups to identify areas of greatest congestion or humoral imbalance, thus guiding the subsequent, more direct application for a deeper release. Having explored the gentle yet firm persuasion of dry cupping, let us now turn our attention to its more assertive counterpart, wet cupping. This method shared the foundational technique of applying suction cups to the skin, but it incorporated an additional crucial step, the deliberate breaking of the skin's surface to allow for the direct removal of blood. Wet cupping was therefore a more explicit form of bloodletting, aiming not just to move humors towards the surface, but to draw them out of the body entirely. It was considered a more potent intervention, reserved for conditions believed to require a more substantial release of bad blood or an excess of a particular troublesome humor, a decisive action for health. The defining preliminary step in wet cupping, before any cups were applied, was a process known as scarification. This involved making a series of small, superficial incisions, or pricks, into the skin in the specific area designated for treatment. This was not intended to be a deep or damaging cutting, but rather to create just enough openings in the skin's barrier to allow blood to be drawn out when the suction of the cup was subsequently applied. The area chosen for scarification might be one that had shown a strong reaction to prior dry cupping, or one known through traditional mappings to correspond to the ailment being addressed, a careful preparation for the release to come indeed. For the task of scarification, practitioners often employed tools similar to those used in Venisection, though perhaps wielded with an even greater delicacy, for these more numerous, shallower cuts. A small sharp lancet, the same kind we discussed for opening veins, could be used to make a series of quick, light pricks, or short, parallel scratches across the skin surface. The physician would need a steady hand and a precise touch to ensure the incisions were of the correct depth, just enough to break the very superficial layers and allow blood to seep, but not so deep as to cause undue pain or damage. Each tiny cut was a prelude to the gentle flow that was hoped for. In addition to the simple lancet, a more specialized instrument known as a scarificator was also commonly used, particularly from the early modern period onwards, though simpler versions existed earlier. A mechanical scarificator typically consisted of a small metal box containing multiple tiny sharp blades, often arranged in rows. These blades could be spring-loaded and, with the release of a trigger or lever, would swiftly protrude from the box to make a set of uniform, shallow incisions simultaneously. This allowed for quicker and often more consistent scarification over a given area compared to making individual cuts. A small machine for a delicate but repetitive task. Imagine the physician, having selected the area, now holding the lancet, or positioning the scarificator upon the patient's skin. If using a lancet, there would be a series of quick, deft movements, the sharp point just grazing the surface, leaving fine red lines. With a spring-loaded scarificator, there would be the gentle pressure of the instrument against the skin, then perhaps a soft click as the mechanism was activated, and the tiny blades would do their work in an instant. The aim was to create a field of very small openings ready for the cup's application, through which targeted humors, carried by the blood, could then be drawn forth from their hidden recesses, invited out into the open with gentle, measured care. Once the skin had been thus prepared, with these many tiny gateways opened, the next step was the application of the cupping vessel itself. The method of creating the vacuum within the cup remained the same as for dry cupping, typically using a brief flame to heat and expel some of the air. The warmed cup would then be swiftly and firmly placed directly over the freshly scarified area, its rim pressing against the skin to form an airtight seal. The cooling air inside would immediately begin to create suction, and the true work of wet cupping, the drawing out of blood, would commence, a visible process of extraction, believed to be deeply and wonderfully purifying. As the vacuum established itself, the skin beneath the cup, already broken by the tiny incisions, would be pulled upwards, and then, through those small openings, blood would begin to emerge. It would well up from each little cut, drawn out by the insistent, gentle pull of the decreasing pressure within the cup. Slowly, steadily, the cup would begin to fill from the bottom up with the dark, viscous liquid. For the practitioner, this visible collection of blood was tangible evidence of the treatment's action, a direct removal of what was considered excessive or corrupted humors, causing the patient's illness. The more blood drawn, up to a point, the more effective the release was often deemed by all. The sensation for the patient during wet cupping would be a combination of feelings. There would be the initial, perhaps slightly stinging or pricking feeling from scarification, though often described as minor. Then, as the cup was applied, the familiar pulling and tightness of suction would be felt, similar to dry cupping, but now accompanied by the awareness that blood was being drawn. Some might feel a sense of warmth as blood pooled in the cup. The overall experience, within the context of a belief in its healing power, might be one of active purging, a tangible sense of the badness leaving the body, which could translate into a feeling of relief or deep cleansing, a noticeable physical process. The physician would carefully monitor the amount of blood being drawn into each cup. The quantity removed would depend on various factors: the patient's perceived strength and constitution, the severity and nature of their ailment, and the specific traditions or teachings the practitioner followed. There was no precise, universally mandated amount. Rather, it was a matter of experienced judgment. The physician would observe the color and consistency of the blood as it collected, looking for signs that the corrupt portion had been adequately removed. Once they deemed that sufficient blood had been let, or if the flow began to naturally diminish, the cup would be prepared for removal, its active phase drawing slowly to a close. To remove the cups after wet cupping, the practitioner would gently break the vacuum seal. This could be done by pressing down on the skin alongside the rim of the cup, allowing a little air to seep in, which would release the suction. The cup, now containing a quantity of the patient's blood, would then be carefully lifted away from the skin. The collected blood, a dark pool within the vessel, would be set aside, perhaps for later, more detailed examination, or simply for disposal. The skin underneath, where the cup had rested over the scarified area, would likely be reddened and might show the small, now bloodless points of the incisions, a clear map of the treatment. Following the removal of the cups and the collected blood, the physician would attend to the treated area, The skin would be gently cleansed, wiping away any remaining blood from around the small incisions. A soothing or antiseptic preparation might then be applied, perhaps a simple herbal salve, an ointment, or a clean dressing to protect the broken skin, to aid in its healing, and to prevent any infection, though understanding of infection was then rudimentary. The patient would often be advised to rest, to allow the body to adjust, and to begin its recovery, the hope being that this release had cleared the path for a return to health and internal well-being. Our quiet exploration of historical medical practices now leads us to a unique method of bloodletting employing living creatures, the use of leeches. This practice, Hirudotherapy, dates to ancient times, favored in Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and continued prominently through the medieval era and beyond. These small beings were seen as nature's tiny surgeons, capable of a delicate and often gentle release of blood, guided by an instinct humans sought to harness for therapeutic ends, a soft drawing out of perceived excess from the body's delicate balance, aiming to restore a sense of calm and health to the individual who was suffering from any kind of painful ailment or internal distress, a truly living remedy. Compared to the sharp lancet or vigorous cupping, leech application was often perceived as a gentler, more natural way to reduce the body's humors. The leech, a creature acting by its biological imperative, fed slowly and steadily. This gradual removal of blood, with unique substances in its saliva, offered a different interaction with the patient's system. It was thought useful for certain conditions or sensitive body areas. A subtle yet persistent intervention, working quietly and without forceful haste, aiming to bring ease where there was discomfort. A soft touch from nature's own pharmacy when other, more direct methods seemed perhaps too harsh for the patient's delicate constitution or specific needs. A quiet biological assistance. Not just any leech found in a pond would suffice for medical purposes. The star of Hirudotherapy, most valued and widely used, was the European medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis. This leech was prized for its gentle bite and reliable blood drawing. It was specifically sought out, even cultivated, for the apothecary's collection and physician's toolkit. Its very name speaks to its long association with healing arts, a living instrument passed down through generations of medical practice, a small, dark creature of the waters, destined for a unique purpose in human health, a helper in the quest for balance when the body was perceived to be in distress, a small but potent ally. The medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis, is a fascinating creature. Typically a few inches long at rest, it could elongate and contract its segmented body. Its color was often dark olive green or brownish, sometimes with intricate patterns of stripes or spots along its back, a camouflage for its aquatic habitat. It possessed two suckers, the posterior for attachment and the anterior or oral sucker housing its three-bladed jaw for bloodletting, a soft exterior hiding precise tools, a marvel of natural design used for centuries to gently draw forth what was deemed too much within a person's system. A living remedy from the quiet ponds and slow streams, a truly special creation. These valuable medicinal leeches were found in freshwater ponds, marshes, and slow streams across Europe and parts of Asia. Their collection became a trade, with leech collectors wading into waters, often using their own legs as bait. Once gathered, leeches were sold to apothecaries or physicians, who kept them in jars of fresh water, with moss or pebbles awaiting deployment. They required careful handling and a suitable environment to remain healthy and ready for work. These small, living medicines, kept ready for when a patient needed their unique, gentle service in the pursuit of restored health and humoral balance, a quiet offering from nature's abundant store of remedies. When a physician decided leech therapy was appropriate, some preparation of the patient's skin was often undertaken. The site for application would be gently cleansed. Sometimes, to entice a reluctant leech, the skin might be sweetened with milk or sugary water, or even pricked lightly to provide a trace of blood as an invitation. The aim was to make the chosen spot as appealing as possible to the discerning leech, ensuring it would affix itself readily and begin its work without undue delay. Every detail was considered to facilitate this collaboration between human healer and creature, a partnership for health and gentle relief from pressing, often painful bodily discomforts. Applying the leech required patience and a gentle guiding hand. The physician might take a leech from its jar, perhaps with forceps or a damp cloth, and place it directly onto the desired spot. If the leech was hesitant or the area difficult to access, it might be confined within a small glass tube or a cupping glass with a hole. its open end pressed against the skin until the leech attached. This ensured the creature bit in the precise location deemed most beneficial for drawing out troublesome humors or relieving local congestion, a careful aiming of nature's tiny instrument to the point of need, ensuring its efforts were focused effectively where they could do the most good for the patient. Leeches were applied to many body locations, their use dictated by the ailment or humoral theory. They were frequently placed over inflamed or painful areas like swollen joints or bruises to reduce local congestion. For headaches or eye inflammations, they might be applied to temples or behind ears. Due to their small size and the perceived gentleness of their bite compared to a lancet, leeches were also considered useful for application to sensitive areas where incision would be risky, on gums, the tongue, around eyes, or on fingers and toes, allowing for targeted treatment where other methods were less suitable, a precise and delicate application of natural healing power and ancient wisdom. Once the leech found a suitable spot and decided to attach, the patient typically felt a very slight initial sensation. This was often described as a tiny prick or minor sting, like a mosquito bite, as the leech's minute teeth first contacted the skin. This feeling was generally brief. The leech, with its oral sucker, would create a firm seal, its body perhaps undulating slightly as it secured its hold, preparing for its slow, steady feeding. For a moment there might be a sense of this small, cool creature upon the skin, a living presence focused on its task, a tiny anchor taking hold with quiet determination, beginning its important work of drawing forth the body's vital fluids. A medicinal leech's bite is remarkable and effective. Within its oral sucker, it has 3 sharp, chitinous jaws in a Y shape, like a tiny, 3-jointed star. Each jaw is lined with numerous minute teeth, like tiny saws. When the leech bites, these jaws move in a sawing motion, creating a characteristic Y-shaped incision. This specialized cutting mechanism is efficient, allowing the leech to access superficial blood vessels with minimal trauma to surrounding tissue. A precise feat of natural engineering, perfectly designed for its purpose of drawing sustenance. A gentle opening for the release of perceived excess within the patient's system. A true marvel of the intricate natural world. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of the leech's feeding is the cocktail of bioactive substances in its saliva. As it bites and feeds, it secretes saliva containing hirudotherapy, a powerful anticoagulant. Hirudotherapy prevents the patient's blood from clotting at the bite site and within the leech digestive system. This is crucial, allowing blood to flow freely for the duration of its meal. Medieval physicians wouldn't have understood the biochemistry, but they observed and valued this effect. How a leech bite would continue to bleed gently even after the creature detached, promoting further release of humors, a truly wondrous property of this small, living remedy indeed. Once attached and its anticoagulant saliva at work, the leech began its slow, rhythmic drawing of blood. Its body would engage in gentle, wave-like muscular contractions, creating suction to pull blood from the tiny wound into its digestive tract. An observer might see these subtle undulations along its length as it fed. The leech itself would gradually swell, its dark, segmented form becoming plumper and heavier as it filled with the patient's blood. This was a quiet, unhurried feast. A patient drawing out a fluid, the leech working diligently, its body a small, expanding vessel, a living testament to the body's fluid nature, a slow, visible transformation taking place before one's very eyes. A single medicinal leech might remain attached and feeding for a considerable period. This could range from 20 minutes to well over an hour, sometimes longer, depending on the leech's size and hunger and the site's vascularity. The physician typically allowed the leech to feed until fully engorged, and it detached on its own. When a leech had taken its fill, its body noticeably swollen and feeding movements ceasing, it would naturally release its hold and drop away. This self-detachment was often seen as an indication the leech had drawn the appropriate amount, guided by its own natural limits, its work now gently and fully completed for the patient's ultimate benefit and relief. After the initial small prick of the bite, the leech's feeding process was often surprisingly painless. This was due to another component in its saliva, an anesthetic substance that numbed the area around the bite. So, while the patient was aware of the leech's physical presence, a soft weight upon their skin, and could see it engorging, they typically felt little to no discomfort from the blood being drawn. There might be a very slight pulling or drawing sensation, but generally the experience was one of passive waiting. A quiet period as the leech performed its slow, methodical work, its presence more a gentle curiosity than a source of any significant pain or undue alarm for the patient. Once the sated leech detached and fell away, the small Y-shaped wound it left often continued to ooze blood for some time, sometimes for several hours. This prolonged, gentle bleeding was a direct result of the hirudin, the anticoagulant, in its saliva, which lingered in the wound, preventing immediate clotting. This afterbleed was often considered a desirable part of the therapy, allowing for a further, gradual release of what was deemed stagnant or corrupt blood from the local area, extending the perceived cleansing effect beyond the leech's direct feeding. The tiny wound was a small price for this extended, gentle drainage and purification of the affected bodily part, a final gift from the creature. Having gently explored the how of bloodletting, the tools, the techniques, the quiet rituals, let us now drift into the why and the what for. If the body's health truly hinged on the delicate balance of its four essential humors, as was so deeply believed, then any disruption to this balance, manifesting as any conceivable illness, could potentially be addressed by adjusting these vital fluids. And the most direct way to adjust them, to reduce a perceived excess or to draw out a corrupted portion, was through the letting of blood. Thus, the single practice in its various forms became an almost universal answer, a go-to remedy for a truly astonishing catalog of human afflictions, a testament to the comprehensive nature of the humoral theory that underpinned it all, each and every day. Imagine, if you will, a medieval physician, their minds steeped in the wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates, observing a patient's distress. Their diagnostic thoughts would invariably turn to the state of the humors, which one was too abundant, which too sluggish, which too hot or too cold. And once that humoral imbalance was identified or at least theorized, bloodletting often presented itself as the most logical, most direct, and most potent intervention available. So let us now unfurl in a calm and measured way the long and varied list of conditions for which this ancient practice was so confidently prescribed. A true catalog of cures as understood in those distant times, a panacea for nearly all that could go wrong with the human frame. Perhaps the most common application of bloodletting was for fevers. Whether you had a raging, intense fever, your skin hot, your pulse racing, or a more intermittent, lingering fever sapping your strength, bloodletting was often the first resort. The logic was clear: fever signified excess heat, and heat was a primary quality of blood. Therefore, a fever suggested an overabundance of blood, or blood that had become too hot. Letting out a portion of this fiery blood was believed to cool the body, reduce the internal conflagration, and restore a more temperate, healthy state, bringing much-needed relief from the oppressive and consuming heat that gripped the unfortunate patient. Or perhaps it was your head that troubled you. Whether you had a dull, persistent ache that clouded your thoughts, or a sharp throbbing pain that made light and sound unbearable, a migraine as we might call it, bloodletting was frequently employed. The rationale here could be twofold: either to relieve a perceived pressure of excess humors, particularly blood, within the vessels of the head, or to draw away corrupted humors that were thought to be irritating the brain or its coverings. Leeches might be applied to the temples or a vein opened in the arm or even the forehead, all with the aim of bringing quiet and ease to a distressed and aching head, a gentle release of those troubling internal pressures. If a part of your body became inflamed, red, swollen, hot, and painful, this clearly signaled to the medieval physician that bloodletting was in order. Whether an inflamed joint, a swollen gland, an angry boil, or any localized area of fiery discomfort, the diagnosis often pointed to a plethora, an accumulation of too much blood in that specific region. By opening a vein nearby, or sometimes at a more distant but supposedly connected point, the physician aimed to draw off this excess blood, thereby reducing swelling, cooling heat, and alleviating pain. It was a direct attempt to lessen local humoral tumult and restore peace to the affected part, a visible reduction of an evident problem. And it wasn't only for clearly defined fevers or localized inflammations. Whether you suffered from more generalized aches and pains throughout your body, a sense of heaviness in the limbs, or mysterious wandering discomforts for which no obvious cause could be found, bloodletting might still be considered. Such pains could be attributed to a general imbalance of the humors, perhaps blood that was too thick or sluggish, or corrupted humors circulating and causing irritation. A judicious letting of blood was thought to thin the blood, promote better circulation, and help the body expel these unseen but deeply felt troublemakers, offering a path towards feeling lighter and more comfortable once more. Should you find yourself struggling with ailments of the chest, your breath labored, your lungs heavy, bloodletting was a common recourse. Whether you had a deep, rattling cough that shook your frame, a sharp pain in your side with every breath suggestive of pleurisy, or the more profound congestion and fever of what might have been pneumonia, the physician often turned to bleeding. The aim was to relieve the perceived burden on the lungs, to draw out the thick, congestive humors, often an excess of blood mixed with phlegm that were thought to be clogging the airways and impeding the vital process of respiration. It was hoped this would allow for easier breathing and quicker resolution. A painfully swollen throat, making swallowing difficult and speech a trial, was another condition frequently addressed by the letting of blood. Whether it was a quinsy, a severe abscess beside the tonsil, or simply an intensely inflamed sore throat, the telltale signs of redness, heat, and swelling pointed directly to an excess of sanual humor in that delicate region. Leeches might be carefully applied to the neck, near the angle of the jaw, or Venisection performed from a vein in the arm, to draw the fiery blood away from the afflicted throat. The desired outcome was a reduction in the painful swelling, a cooling of the inflammation, and a restoration of comfort. Even troubles of the stomach and the digestive system, though perhaps less obviously linked to excess blood in our modern view, were not exempt from this ubiquitous treatment. Whether you experienced indigestion, sharp stomach pains, a loss of appetite, or feelings of excessive fullness and discomfort after eating, a humoral imbalance was often suspected as the root cause. Perhaps the blood supplying the digestive organs was too hot or too thick, or another humor was disrupting the stomach's delicate work. Bloodletting, in such cases, was intended to correct this underlying imbalance, to purify the system, and to restore the proper digestive coction, bringing comfort back to the troubled belly. Further down the digestive tract, disorders of the bowels, while sometimes treated with purgatives or enemas, could also occasionally call for bloodletting, particularly if accompanied by fever or signs of severe inflammation. Whether you suffered from dysentery, with its distressing and often bloody flux, or other persistent disturbances of the inner flows, the physician might consider letting blood to cool an internal heat, to draw away corrupt humors that were irritating the intestines, or to try and staunch an internal hemorrhage by diverting the blood's flow. The precise rationale would depend on the specific symptoms and the physician's careful interpretation, but the principle of rebalancing the vital fluids remained paramount. In the frightening event of convulsions, seizures, or what was then termed the falling sickness, epilepsy, bloodletting was a widely practiced, though often desperate measure. Whether seizures were frequent and violent or more subtle, they were often attributed to an agitation of humors affecting the brain, perhaps a rush of corrupt vapors or an excess of a particular humor, like black bile or agitated blood, causing a storm within the head. By letting blood, often from the head or neck if possible, or a major vein in the arm, physicians hoped to relieve this internal pressure, calm the disturbed humors, and reduce the frequency or severity of these terrifying episodes, seeking stillness for a troubled mind. If a heavy sadness, a deep, unshakable melancholy, settled upon your spirit, weighing you down like a leaden cloak, this too was seen through the lens of humoral imbalance, and thus a candidate for bloodletting. Whether this profound unhappiness manifested as listlessness, tearfulness, a withdrawal from the world, or dark thoughts, the culprit was often identified as an excess of black bile, the cold, dry humor. It was thought this black bile could become too thick, stagnant, or adust, poisoning mind and spirit. Bloodletting was sometimes employed to thin this black bile or draw out blood contaminated by its excess, hoping to lift the oppressive shadow from the sufferer's weary soul. Conversely, for states of wild agitation, uncontrollable excitement, or what might be described as mania, bloodletting was also a common prescription. Whether you were experiencing racing thoughts, an inability to sleep, aggressive outbursts, or a complete departure from rational behavior, this was often attributed to an overabundance of hot, volatile humors, perhaps an excess of blood itself, making the spirit too fiery, or an overproduction of color, the hot and dry yellow bile, leading to an irritable and frenetic state. The letting of blood, in these instances, was intended as a cooling and calming measure, an attempt to dampen the internal fires, to reduce the agitation, and to bring the mind back to a state of more peaceful thought. Should you suffer from spells of dizziness, the unsettling sensation of the world spinning around you known as vertigo, or even episodes of fainting where consciousness momentarily fled, these too often found their way into the physician's list of indications for bloodletting. Whether these sensations were fleeting or frequent, mild or debilitating, they could be ascribed to various humoral disturbances affecting the head and the senses. Perhaps impure vapors were rising from the stomach to cloud the brain, or the blood itself was too thick. Letting blood, often from the upper body, was aimed at clearing these vapors, improving circulation, or relieving a perceived congestion, thereby steadying the senses. Even in the face of the most feared and devastating of epidemic diseases, such as the dreaded pestilence, the Black Death, bloodletting was often turned to, though with a sense of profound urgency and perhaps desperation. Whether a patient presented with the telltale swollen buboes, a raging fever, or the dark spots that signaled the body's struggle, physicians, lacking other effective treatments, might resort to phlebotomy. The hope, however faint, was that by releasing a quantity of blood, they might also release some of the pestilential poison that had invaded the system, or perhaps rebalance humors thrown into violent disarray by the overwhelming force of that terrible disease. Similarly, for other terrifying eruptive fevers that swept through populations such as smallpox or measles, which brought forth widespread rashes and high fevers, bloodletting remained a common, though contentious, part of the therapeutic approach. Whether the skin was covered in painful pustules or a fiery red rash, the internal heat and humoral turmoil were evident to the medieval practitioner, and they might let blood in an attempt to cool the patient, to draw out the morbific matter believed to be causing the eruption, or to support the body in its struggle to expel the disease. The outcomes were often poor, but the logic of humoral balance still dictated the attempt. Should your eyes become red, inflamed, painful, and sensitive to light, a condition we might now recognize as conjunctivitis or uveitis, bloodletting was a favored remedy. Whether the affliction was in one eye or both, the medieval physician would likely attribute it to an influx of hot, acrid, or corrupt humors to these delicate organs. Leeches were often carefully applied to the temples, near the corners of the eyes, or even to the eyelids themselves, with the aim of directly drawing away these offending humors. Alternatively, Venisection from the arm or neck might be performed to divert the flow of bad humors away from the head, seeking to restore clarity and comfort. Ailments of the ears, too, fell within the broad scope of bloodletting's application. Whether you suffered from a throbbing earache, a discharge from the ear canal, ringing in the ears, ringing in the ears, ringing in the ears, or even a gradual loss of hearing, these symptoms could be interpreted as evidence of problematic humors collecting in or affecting the auditory system. An excess of thick phlegm or hot choleric humors might be blamed leeches applied behind the ear, or Venisection aimed at clearing the head of general humoral congestion were common approaches. The hope was to relieve pain, reduce inflammation, and, if possible, restore the clarity of hearing by ensuring the local humors were pure. Paradoxically, even if you suffered from a spontaneous and profuse nosebleed, known as epistaxis, bloodletting might still be prescribed by some physicians. While it might seem counterintuitive to let more blood when blood was already being lost, the logic often involved redirecting the flow. If the nosebleed was thought to be due to a dangerous plethora of blood in the head, letting blood from a vein in the arm or foot was believed to draw the excess downwards, away from the more vulnerable vessels of the nose. Alternatively, if the nosebleed itself was seen as a symptom of bad blood seeking an outlet, a controlled phlebotomy was intended to remove this problematic blood more safely. The intense, throbbing pain of a toothache or the discomfort of swollen, inflamed gums was yet another common complaint for which bloodletting was considered beneficial. Whether the pain was localized to a single tooth or affected the entire jaw, it was often attributed to hot, corrupt humors accumulating in the area. Leeches could be applied directly to the swollen gum, a practice that persisted for centuries due to the leech's ability to reduce local swelling and numb the pain with its saliva. Alternatively, general bloodletting might be performed to draw these humors away from the head, offering relief from one of humanity's most ancient and persistent afflictions. Skin diseases in their myriad forms were also frequently subjected to bloodletting, whether you presented with angry red boils, itchy rashes, persistent eczema, or weeping sores. These outward manifestations were seen as signs of internal impurity, of corrupt humors attempting to escape the body, or of an imbalance in the blood itself. Bloodletting was employed as a means of purifying the blood, of drawing out the peccant or offending matter, and of cooling any internal heat that might be contributing to the skin's distress. The goal was to cleanse the system from within, thereby allowing the skin to heal and return to its natural, healthy state, a visible clearing of inner turmoil. The sharp, agonizing pain of gout, often settling in the joints of the feet and hands, or the more widespread aches and stiffness of rheumatism, were further candidates for the physician's lancet, or leeches. Whether the joints were visibly swollen and red, or the pain was a deeper, more chronic ache, these conditions were typically ascribed to an accumulation of thick, corrupt, or chalky humors, like phlegm or melancholic residues, in the affected joints. Bloodletting, often from a site near the afflicted joint, was intended to draw out these morbid humors, to reduce inflammation, and to restore mobility and comfort, helping to ease the burden of these painful and often crippling ailments. For women, Bloodletting was also applied to a range of gynecological concerns, whether it was for suppressed or irregular menstruation, excessive menstrual bleeding, or difficulties related to childbirth. Humoral theory provided a ready explanation, and bloodletting a potential solution. Suppressed menses, for example, might indicate a plethora of blood that needed an outlet, so bleeding from the foot, near the saphenous vein, thought to connect to the uterus, was common. After childbirth, it might be used to clear impure lochia or to prevent postpartum fever. The aim, as always, was to restore the body's natural rhythms and balances as understood through the complex interplay of the four humors. Even physical injuries, such as bruises, sprains, or contusions, could call for bloodletting. Whether you had fallen and developed a large dark bruise or twisted an ankle causing it to swell painfully, these were seen as instances of blood and other humors stagnating or collecting improperly in the injured tissue. Letting blood from near the site of injury or applying leeches was thought to relieve this congestion, reduce swelling and discoloration, and promote faster healing by drawing away the bruised or extravasated blood and encouraging the inflow of fresh, healthy humors to repair the damage. It was a way of actively managing the body's response to physical trauma, according to their prevailing theories. And it wasn't only for those already ill that bloodletting was prescribed. Remarkably, it was also widely practiced as a preventative measure to maintain good health and ward off future sickness. Whether you felt perfectly well or perhaps just a little sluggish, periodic, seasonal bloodletting was common. Many underwent spring bleeding to cleanse the blood of heavy winter humors and prepare for active summer months, or autumn bleeding to rid the body of summer's excess heat. It was like a routine spring cleaning for the body, intended to keep the humors in perfect balance and thus ensure continued vitality in a long, healthy life. A proactive step towards lasting well-being, a commitment to inner harmony. Having journeyed through the why and the what of bloodletting, exploring its deep roots in humoral theory and the vast array of ailments it purported to cure, a natural question now arises in our quiet contemplation. Who were the individuals entrusted with this ubiquitous and significant practice? Who were the hands that wielded the lancet, applied the cups, or guided the leech in these ancient rituals of healing? The performance of bloodletting, so central to medieval medicine, was not the domain of a single type of practitioner, but rather involved a spectrum of healers, each with their own training, status, and specific role in this enduring therapeutic tradition. A varied cast of dedicated characters. The medical landscape of the medieval period, much like our own in some ways, possessed a certain hierarchy, a layering of expertise and responsibility. Not everyone who offered healing was considered equal in knowledge or in the scope of their practice. For a procedure as common and as fundamentally important as bloodletting, several distinct groups of individuals might be involved, from the most learned university scholars who prescribed it from afar to the skilled artisans who performed the actual physical act of releasing the blood. Understanding these roles helps us paint a fuller picture of how medicine was experienced by those who lived so many long centuries ago, a tapestry woven with different threads of skill. At the apex of the formal medical hierarchy stood the university-trained physician. These were learned men, individuals who had dedicated years to the rigorous study of ancient medical texts within the hallowed halls of emerging European universities. Their minds were filled with the complex theories of Galen, the aphorisms of Hippocrates, and the voluminous works of Arab scholars like Avicenna. Their education was primarily theoretical, focused on understanding the intricate balance of the four humors, the influence of the stars and seasons on health, and the subtle signs that indicated which humor was amiss within a patient's body. They were men of letters, their authority rooted in classical knowledge and esteemed textual interpretation. The primary role of the university physician was diagnostic and prescriptive rather than hands-on intervention. When summoned to a patient's bedside, perhaps in a wealthy household or a monastic infirmary, the physician would engage in a careful examination. This might involve inspecting the patient's tongue, feeling their pulse, and, very importantly, meticulously analyzing the patient's urine. Its color, consistency, and even its smell were thought to offer profound clues about the internal state of the humors. They might consult astrological charts to determine favorable times for treatment, their minds working like scholarly detectives piecing together the puzzle of the illness according to the accepted rules of their ancient art. Once the physician had arrived at a diagnosis, determining which humor was in excess or corrupted, they would then prescribe the appropriate course of treatment. And very often, as we have seen, that prescription would include bloodletting. The learned physician would specify the amount of blood to be let, the precise vein or location on the body from which it should be drawn, perhaps a vein in the arm for a general effect, or one near an afflicted organ for a more targeted release. And sometimes, even the most auspicious day or hour for the procedure to be performed. based on celestial alignments. Their careful instructions were detailed, born of their deep theoretical understanding of the body. Crucially, however, the university-trained physician of the medieval period typically considered themselves above the manual act of performing surgery or even the relatively common procedure of bloodletting. Their esteemed work was intellectual, a matter of diagnosis and the skilled interpretation of signs and texts. The physical act of cutting into the body, of shedding blood, was often viewed as a lesser manual craft, something to be delegated to practitioners of a different and generally lower social standing. This distinction between the physician of the mind and the surgeon of the hand was quite pronounced for a significant portion of this era, reflecting a societal hierarchy that valued theoretical knowledge greatly. So if the learned physician prescribed the bleeding but did not perform it, who then was responsible for the actual physical act? This vital role most commonly fell to a figure known as the barber surgeon. These were skilled artisans, individuals whose shops were familiar sights in towns and villages, bustling centers not only for a shave and a haircut, but also for a range of essential medical services. The barber surgeon was the workhorse of practical medieval medicine, the person most likely to be called upon by the general populace when blood needed to be let, a tooth needed pulling, or a minor wound required dressing. They were the indispensable hands-on healers of their communities indeed. The very name barber surgeon speaks to the dual nature of their trade. As barbers, they were, of course, adept at shaving beards and cutting hair, skills requiring a steady hand and sharp instruments, but their expertise extended well beyond simple grooming. They were also the practitioners of minor surgery, lancing boils, setting simple fractures, treating wounds and ulcers, and perhaps most frequently, extracting troublesome teeth. And central to their surgical repertoire was the art of bloodletting in all its forms, whether by opening a vein with a lancet or Phlegm, applying cupping glasses, or even supervising the careful application of medicinal leeches. Their domain was the physical body. Unlike the university physicians who immersed themselves in ancient texts, barber surgeons learned their craft primarily through a lengthy period of apprenticeship. A young boy would be bound to a master barber surgeon for many years, gradually acquiring the necessary skills through observation, practice, and direct instruction. He has learned how to sharpen and maintain the tools of the trade, how to assist in procedures, how to judge the appropriate amount of blood to let based on the patient's appearance and the master's guidance, and how to manage the everyday realities of their busy practice. It was a deeply practical education, focused on manual dexterity and vital experiential knowledge. For the vast majority of people in the medieval period, from peasants and artisans to merchants and minor nobility, it was the barber surgeon to whom they would turn when bloodletting was required, either on their own initiative for a common ailment or following the prescription of a physician. Barber surgeons were generally more accessible and their services more affordable than those of the university-educated physicians. Their shops were often centrally located, bustling with activity, and they provided a direct, tangible form of treatment that many people understood and expected. They were the familiar faces of everyday healthcare, the first line of practical defense against common illness. Imagine stepping into a medieval barber surgeon's shop. It might be a modest space, perhaps with a wooden bench for waiting clients, shelves lined with jars of ointments, dried herbs, and perhaps even a few leeches swimming in a container of water. The air might carry the scent of soap, medicinal preparations, and faintly the metallic tang of blood. Razors, lancets, fleams, and tooth-pulling instruments would be neatly arranged, glinting in the light. It was a place of both grooming and healing where one could have a shave, hear the local news, and also undergo the common ritual of bloodletting, a communal hub where the body's needs, both superficial and internal, were addressed with well-practiced skill. One of the most enduring symbols associated with the barber surgeon, a sign that has remarkably persisted in various forms even to this day, is the barber pole. This iconic striped pole, often seen outside barber shops, has its origins deeply embedded in the bloodletting practices of the medieval period. It served as a clear visual marker, an instantly recognizable advertisement for the services offered within, a beacon for those in need of a shave, a trim, or, very importantly, a therapeutic bleed. Its colors and form were not arbitrary, but carried specific, symbolic meanings directly related to this most common of medical interventions. A silent story told in its spiraling stripes. The traditional colors of the barber pole, red and white, are a direct reference to the practice of bloodletting. The vibrant red stripe unequivocally symbolized the blood itself, the vital fluid that was so often the focus of treatment. The clean white stripe, in turn, represented the linen bandages that were used to wrap the arm after Venisection. to stem the flow of blood, or to dress any small wounds incurred during minor surgical procedure. Thus, the intertwined red and white spiral vividly depicted the two key elements of the barber surgeon's most frequent and defining medical act, the letting of blood and the subsequent bandaging, a clear public declaration of their respected trade. The pole itself, around which these colored stripes would spiral, also had a symbolic meaning connected to bloodletting. It is widely believed to represent the staff or rod that patients would be instructed to grip tightly during Venisection. Squeezing this staff would cause the muscles in the arm to contract, making the veins, particularly in the inner elbow, bulge and become more prominent, thus making them easier for the barber surgeon to locate and access with their lancet or Fleam. Sometimes a brass basin, representing the bowl used to collect the blood, would be placed at the top or bottom of the pole, further cementing its connection to this ancient medical ritual. Beyond the university physicians and the ubiquitous barber surgeons, other individuals also played a role in providing medical care, including bloodletting during the medieval period. Within the walls of monasteries, monks often possessed medical knowledge, gleaned from ancient texts preserved in their libraries. Many monastic orders considered the care of the sick a charitable duty. Monastic infirmaries were often well organized, and monks with medical training would not only tend to their sick brethren, but also sometimes to the local lay population. They too would have understood and practiced bloodletting according to humoral principles, their healing work intertwined with their deep spiritual devotion, a gentle hand guided by both faith and learning. The healing landscape was also populated by a variety of other figures. Wise women or folk healers, particularly in rural areas, possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies and traditional healing practices, though their role in formal, theory-based bloodletting is less clearly documented than that of physicians or barber surgeons. They might, however, have used leeches or simple scarification. It is also important to acknowledge the presence of traveling healers or empirics, some of whom may have offered services like bloodletting, with varying degrees of skill and legitimacy. The quality and nature of care could differ significantly depending on who was providing it and where one lived, a complex web of healing traditions. Having considered the healers and tools of bloodletting, let us gently shift our focus to the central figure, the patient. It was upon their body that these theories were enacted, their veins opened, their blood let in the earnest hope of healing. To understand medieval medicine, we must imagine with quiet empathy what this experience might have been like for the person lying there, vulnerable and hopeful, entrusting their well-being to the healer and the wisdom of the age, a silent participant in a very active and often repeated process of seeking relief from their suffering and bodily distress. Their quiet endurance a testament to their desire for health. Imagine yourself in that distant era, the body's inner workings, profound mysteries, and illnesses' causes often attributed to divine will, unseen influences, or humoral imbalance. There were no antibiotics, no germ theory, no advanced diagnostics existed beyond the physician's senses, and their interpretation of ancient texts. Sickness could descend swiftly. In such a world, tradition held immense power, and practices like bloodletting, sanctioned by centuries of use and learned authority, were accepted as necessary, vital interventions, a beacon of hope in uncertain times, a familiar path to potential healing when illness struck with its unwelcome force, disrupting the quiet flow of ordinary daily life. The environment in which bloodletting took place would vary greatly depending on the patient's social standing and specific circumstances. For many ordinary folk, the procedure might occur in their own humble dwelling, perhaps as they lay in their familiar bed or seated on a simple stool in a common room. The light might filter in through a small window, or the scene could be illuminated by the flickering glow of a tallow candle. There were no sterile operating theaters, but rather the everyday surroundings of life into which this significant medical ritual would be introduced, with a quiet sense of solemn purpose, an expected event. Alternatively, a patient might visit the local barber surgeon's shop, a place we have already glimpsed, bustling with the tools and scents of both grooming and minor medical procedures. Here, amongst others perhaps awaiting their turn for various treatments, the bleeding would take place. For those with greater means or within monastic orders, a designated infirmary chamber might be used, perhaps quieter and set apart, offering a more focused environment for the physician or monastic healer to attend to the patient. Regardless of the specific location, the essential elements remained: the patient, the practitioner, the tools, and the shared belief in the necessity of the act. Imagine the patient now settled in the chosen spot, awaiting the commencement of the procedure. The physician or barber surgeon might be making their final preparations, perhaps laying out a clean cloth, selecting a lancet, or ensuring the bleeding bowl was close at hand. There might be a quiet murmur of instructions, or perhaps gentle reassurances from the healer. For the patient, these moments of waiting could be filled with a complex tapestry of deeply felt emotions. The air itself might seem still, charged with a sense of anticipation for what was to come, a focused quiet before the ritual of release began, each second stretching out as the moment drew steadily nearer. It is only natural to assume that a degree of fear would be present in the heart of many patients. Fear of the unknown, particularly if the illness was severe or its nature unclear. Fear of the procedure itself, the thought of a sharp instrument breaking the skin, the sight of one's own blood being drained away, the potential for some pain, however brief it was promised to be by the attendant. There might also be a deeper fear of weakness, of what the loss of this vital fluid might mean for their already compromised strength, or even a hidden fear of complications. These were understandable human apprehensions, an instinctive bodily caution. Yet, intertwined with this fear, and often more powerful, was the bright flame of hope. Hope for relief from the immediate suffering that had brought them to the healer. The burning fever, the throbbing pain, the suffocating congestion, or the heavy weight of deep melancholy. Hope for a cure, for a true restoration of health and a return to the familiar rhythms of daily life. For many, bloodletting was not just passive endurance, but an active step being taken against their ailment, a tangible intervention that promised a change for the better. This hope could transform the experience, imbuing it with purpose and belief in renewed well-being, a potent balm. A crucial element in the patient's emotional landscape was often a profound trust in the healer. Whether a learned university physician or a skilled local barber surgeon, these practitioners were figures of authority, possessors of specialized knowledge passed down through respected generations. Their calm demeanor, their familiarity with the procedure, their confident handling of the various instruments, all these could inspire a sense of deep reassurance in the patient. In an age where medical understanding was limited, placing one's faith in the wisdom and skill of the healer was a vital coping mechanism, a pillar of strength upon which the patient could lean as they faced the ordeal, a quiet surrender to their perceived expertise. Furthermore, there was the deeply ingrained belief in the system of humorism itself, and thus in the efficacy of bloodletting as a treatment. For centuries, this had been the accepted explanation for illness and the primary method of restoring health. It was part of the cultural fabric, a medical tradition as familiar and unquestioned as the changing of the seasons for most people. When everyone around you, family, community, respected scholars, believed that bloodletting was beneficial, it was natural for the patient to share that conviction. This collective belief created a powerful context, shaping the patient's expectations and their interpretation of the experience, reinforcing the idea of its necessity. And so with this blend of fear, hope, and abiding trust, the patient would ready themselves. They might be asked to extend an arm, or to expose another part of their body selected for the bleeding, according to the physician's instruction. A ligature, perhaps a strip of soft linen or leather, might be tied gently but firmly around the limb, above the chosen site. The patient would feel the gradual increase in pressure, a snug embrace, and perhaps observe their veins becoming more prominent beneath the skin, a visible preparation for the impending release. The healer's hands, cool or warm, would touch their skin, adjusting the ligature, a human connection. The demeanor of the practitioner during these preparatory moments could significantly influence the patient's state of mind and body. A calm, confident healer, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones, explaining the steps if appropriate for the patient, or simply working with quiet, focused efficiency, could do much to allay the patient's natural anxieties. Their practiced movements, the way they handled their instruments with an air of complete familiarity, would signal competence and a sense of control. This sense of being in capable hands, even when facing an uncomfortable procedure, was a powerful psychological balm, a comfort in a vulnerable time of need and distress. Then would come the moment of keenest anticipation, as the lancet or Fleam was brought into position ready for its work. The patient might instinctively hold their breath, their senses perhaps heightened by the gravity of the moment. The glint of polished steel in the ambient light, the focused gaze of the practitioner, the infinitesimal pause before the decisive action, all would contribute to a charged stillness in the room. For some, this might be a moment to offer a silent prayer for a good outcome, or to brace themselves inwardly for the sensation to come. The world might seem to narrow to this single point of focus, the skin, the sharp instrument, and the imminent release. The actual incision, when it came, was typically described as a brief, sharp sting or a quick, sudden prick, With a skilled practitioner using a sharp lancet, the sensation would be momentary, a fleeting awareness of the skin being broken by the keen edge. If a phlegm struck by a blood stick was used, there might be the dull thud of the stick and a slightly different, perhaps more jarring but equally quick sensation of the blade entering the vein. It was not usually portrayed as an experience of prolonged or excruciating agony, but rather as a necessary, transient discomfort that quickly passed, the sharpness often less than the ache it was meant to relieve. If leeches were the chosen method, the initial sensation would be different again, a more gradual introduction. The patient might first feel the cool, perhaps slightly moist touch of the leech as it was placed upon their skin by the healer. There would be a period of exploration as the creature sought a suitable spot to attach, its segmented body perhaps moving with a soft, subtle grace across the designated area. Then, as it bit, that small, often Y-shaped incision made by its tiny teeth would feel like a pinprick or minor sting, sometimes barely perceptible. Unlike the immediate flow from a lancet, the leech would then begin its slow, steady work, its presence a soft weight. Whether by lancet, phlegm, or leech, the next significant experience for the patient would be the sight and sensation of their own blood beginning to flow. From the small incision, a dark red bead would appear, then well up and begin to trickle or stream outwards. The patient might watch this, fascinated or perhaps a little disquieted, as this vital fluid, usually contained within, made its journey outwards from their body. They might also feel the distinct warmth of the blood as it flowed over their skin, a surprisingly gentle heat, a liquid reminder of the life force it represented. This visible and tangible release was a powerful confirmation that the treatment was truly underway. As the blood flowed, it would be collected in the waiting bowl, often held by an assistant or the practitioner themselves, with steady hands. For the patient, observing this bowl gradually filling could be a deeply symbolic experience, a moment of quiet contemplation. Each drop, each accumulating ounce, represented the departure of the illness, the lessening of the humoral burden that afflicted them. The rising level of dark fluid was a tangible measure of the treatment's progress, a visual reassurance that something significant was being done to combat their ailment. It was not an abstract concept, but a physical removal of what was believed to be the cause of their suffering, a subtraction. In the often quiet room, the sounds of the bloodletting, though subtle, would contribute to the patient's sensory experience throughout the procedure. There might be the soft, rhythmic dripping of blood into the metal or ceramic bowl, a gentle, almost hypnotic patter filling the stillness. If the flow was stronger, it could be a quiet, continuous trickling, a liquid murmur. The practitioner might offer soft words of encouragement, or there might be only the sound of their focused breathing. These understated sounds, far from being alarming, could become part of the calming ritual, underscoring the deliberate and measured nature of the procedure, a quiet drama of release. As the blood continued to flow from the opened vein or leech bite, the patient might begin to experience a range of physical sensations within their body. Some reported a feeling of gradual lightening, as if a heavy weight was being lifted from their limbs or their spirit. This could be particularly true if they had been suffering from a sense of fullness or pressure, as was often theorized with fevers or various inflammations. Others might start to feel a creeping coolness pervading their extremities, especially if a significant amount of warm blood was being removed. The physician would likely be monitoring the patient's pulse and general appearance, looking for signs. A very common and indeed often expected sensation as bloodletting progressed, particularly if a substantial amount was taken, was a growing feeling of weakness or distinct faintness. The patient might feel lightheaded, a little dizzy, their vision perhaps momentarily blurring at the edges. Their limbs could feel heavy, their energy draining away from them. In some instances, patients did lose consciousness briefly during the procedure. While this might seem alarming to us, this weakness was often interpreted by medieval practitioners, and sometimes by patients, as a sign the treatment was working effectively, that the plethora or harmful excess had been significantly reduced and purged. If leeches were being used, the patient would have the unique experience of watching these small creatures gradually swell and distend as they filled with blood from the site. The leech's dark body would become noticeably plumper, its segments stretched, a living indicator of the amount of fluid being ingested from their system. This visual could be strangely mesmerizing for some, a direct observation of nature at work in the service of healing. The leech itself, after its initial attachment, would be largely still, save for the subtle internal movements of its feeding. There was a quiet efficiency to its task, a biological precision that many found less alarming than the cold glint of steel. Whether the flow of blood was stopped by the physician after a period of venesection, or whether a sated leech detached on its own accord, there would come a point when the act of bleeding ceased, much to the patient's relief. If a ligature had been used, the patient would feel the release of its pressure around their limb, a welcome easing. The practitioner would then attend to the small wound, applying gentle pressure to ensure the bleeding stopped completely. For the patient, this marked the end of the most immediate part of the procedure, a sense of the ritual having run its intended course. There might be a feeling of relief that it was over, mixed with continued hope, especially after the use of leeches whose saliva contained powerful anticoagulants. The patient would experience a continued gentle oozing of blood from the bite sites for some hours after the creature had finished its meal. This afterbleed was often considered beneficial, a further slow cleansing of the local area. The small Y-shaped wounds left by the leeches would be covered with a light dressing, which would gradually become stained by the persistent discharge. This lingering drainage was a reminder of the treatment, a sign that the body was still releasing what was not needed. It was not typically a cause for alarm, but rather accepted as part of the leech's unique way of working. In the immediate aftermath of any significant bloodletting, the patient would almost invariably feel weak and quite tired, their body adjusting to the loss. They would be encouraged to rest quietly, to conserve their energy as the body began the process of recovery and, it was sincerely hoped, rebalancing its humors. This period of lassitude was an expected and even welcomed consequence. Food and drink, perhaps warm broths or restorative cordials, might be offered to help regain strength. The weakness itself, far from being seen solely as a negative side effect, was often incorporated into the understanding of the cure. The body, relieved of its excess, was now more receptive. The site of the Venisection or the leech bites would be a focal point of minor attention for a few days following the procedure. A small dressing might be kept in place, protecting the tiny wound as it began to heal. There might be some local tenderness, a slight bruising around the area, or a little itching as the skin mended itself. These small marks were the physical evidence of the intervention, a tangible reminder of the blood that had been led in the earnest pursuit of health. They were not seen as blemishes, but rather as honorable scars of a necessary battle fought against the forces of illness, symbols of the patient's quiet endurance. Ultimately, the patient's experience of bloodletting was profoundly shaped by their belief system and the cultural context of their time. The expectation that this procedure, sanctioned by ancient wisdom and performed by a trusted healer, would bring relief was a powerful force indeed. Even if immediate improvement was not dramatic, the conviction that the correct and necessary steps had been taken could provide immense psychological comfort. This deep faith in the process, this trust in the removal of bad humors, could itself contribute to a perceived sense of well-being, demonstrating the intricate dance between physical intervention, emotional hope, and the cultural meaning of healing. We have journeyed through the methods of bloodletting, from the direct opening of a vein to the gentle work of the cupping glass and the slow feast of the leech. It might appear from our modern distance as a somewhat crude or universally applied remedy. However, to the medieval mind, and particularly to the learned physician, the act of letting blood was ideally not a random or haphazard affair. Beneath the surface of this common practice lay a complex web of considerations, a system of rules and beliefs that sought to tailor the treatment to the individual and to the very rhythms of the cosmos, adding layers of perceived precision to this ancient art of healing, a quiet science of its own unique character. Indeed, while bloodletting was a cornerstone of therapy, applied to an astonishing range of ailments, the truly skilled practitioner was believed to understand not just how to perform the act, but precisely when, where, and how much blood to let. This was where the art of medicine, as they understood it, came into play. It involved a careful assessment of numerous factors, a weighing of influences both earthly and celestial, all designed to maximize the potential benefits of the procedure and minimize any perceived risks. This was not simply about draining fluid, but about thoughtfully and strategically intervening in the body's delicate humoral economy, a nuanced approach to a powerful treatment, full of many subtle considerations. Foremost among considerations was the patient themselves. Age played a significant role. The very young, infants and small children, were generally considered too delicate for copious bloodletting, their vital spirits still forming. If bleeding was deemed absolutely necessary for a child, it would typically be a very small amount, perhaps using a tiny leech or minute incision. Similarly, the very elderly, whose natural heat and moisture were thought diminished, were also often led more cautiously, lest the procedure further deplete their waning vital forces, a gentle approach for tender years and fading strength, a thoughtful sparing of their essential being. The sex of the patient, too, could enter the physician's calculations. For women, considerations around menstruation were important. Bloodletting might be avoided during monthly courses or used to provoke a suppressed flow. Beyond gender, the patient's overall constitution or temperament, determined by their dominant humor, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, or phlegmatic, was key. A robust, sanguine individual was thought able to withstand and perhaps benefit from more copious bleeding than a pale, phlegmatic person whose humors were already considered cool and moist. A careful tailoring to their perceived inner nature and physical resilience, a truly personalized if ancient approach. This concept of constitution was central indeed. Each person was believed to have their own unique natural balance of humors, their own baseline state of being. A physician would strive to understand this individual makeup before prescribing bloodletting. For instance, someone with a naturally melancholic, black bile dominant constitution might be bled very carefully, as excessive removal of blood could inadvertently strengthen the perceived cold and dry nature of their imbalance. Conversely, a sanguine individual whose dominant heme was blood itself might be bled more readily and with larger amounts, as their system was thought to naturally produce more of this vital fluid, and thus could more easily spare a portion of it. The specific illness afflicting the patient, its perceived severity, and its supposed humoral cause were of course paramount in guiding the application of bloodletting. Acute and hot diseases such as high fevers, severe inflammations, or conditions like pleurisy were often met with prompt and sometimes quite substantial bloodletting aimed at quickly reducing the fiery excess of blood or color that was believed to be raging within. Chronic conditions, or those deemed cold and moist in nature, such as some forms of dropsy or persistent coughs attributed to phlegm, might call for less aggressive bleeding or for bleeding combined with other complementary treatments like warming herbs or various types of gentle purgatives. Furthermore, a conscientious physician would always attempt to assess the patient's current strength and vitality before proceeding with bloodletting. If the patient was already greatly weakened by a prolonged illness or appeared frail and depleted of their essential energies, copious bleeding would be strongly contraindicated, as it could overwhelm their remaining life force, a disastrous outcome. The aim was to relieve the body of an oppressive excess, not to extinguish the vital spark that sustained it. Thus, the quantity of blood to be let was not a fixed measure, but a careful judgment call, ideally based on a thoughtful observation of the patient's resilience and their overall ability to withstand the procedure. Beyond these earthly considerations of the patient's individual state, another powerful set of influences was believed to govern the timing and efficacy of bloodletting, the movements and positions of the celestial bodies in the heavens above. Medical astrology was a deeply ingrained part of medieval and Renaissance medicine, a respected field of study. The guiding principle was, as above, so below, so the conviction that the macrocosm of the heavens exerted a direct and predictable influence on the microcosm of the human body. Therefore, to ignore the stars when undertaking a significant medical intervention like bloodletting would have been considered by many learned physicians to be quite unwise. A key concept within medical astrology was the zodiacal man, or homo signorum. This was a diagram, commonly found in medical texts and almanacs of the period, that depicted the human body with each part or organ governed by one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. For instance, Aries was said to rule the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms and shoulders, Leo the heart, and so on, down to Pisces ruling the feet. This cosmic map was not merely symbolic, it had direct practical implications for procedures like bloodletting. A physician would be cautious about bleeding a part of the body when the moon was transiting through the zodiacal sign that governed that part. The timing of bloodletting was thus often meticulously planned according to astrological calendars and charts. Certain days of the month or week were deemed more favorable or unfavorable for such depletive procedures. The phase of the moon was a particularly important consideration for the medieval physician. For example, bleeding during a waning moon, as it decreased in visibility, was often preferred, as this period was associated with purging, cleansing, and the drawing out of excesses from the body. Conversely, a waxing moon, increasing towards fullness, might be seen as a time for building up strength, and thus less suitable for therapies like bloodletting. The positions and alignments of the planets also played a crucial role in these astrological calculations for determining medical treatments. Each planet was associated with certain qualities, specific humors, and various bodily functions. Mars, for instance, was linked to heat, iron, blood, and surgery, so its position could be highly significant. Saturn, associated with coldness, dryness, melancholy, and restrictions, would also be carefully noted. A physician might avoid bloodletting if certain planets were in unfavorable aspects to each other or to the moon, or they might choose a time when planetary influences seem to support the intended outcome of the bleeding, a complex celestial dance. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates had described the concept of critical days in the course of an illness, specific days, e.g., the 7th, 14th, 21st, on which a fever or disease was thought to reach a significant turning point, either for better or indeed for worse. This idea persisted strongly through the medieval period and beyond. Physicians would carefully track the progression of an illness in relation to these critical days. Interventions like bloodletting might be timed to coincide with, or sometimes to deliberately avoid, these junctures in an attempt to support nature's efforts or to gently steer the illness towards a more favorable resolution. To navigate these intricate astrological considerations, physicians and other literate healers often relied on detailed almanacs and astronomical tables. These books, sometimes beautifully illustrated with celestial charts and diagrams, would provide information on the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, the phases of the moon, favorable and unfavorable days for various activities, including bloodletting, purging, or even bathing and cutting hair, and often included diagrams of the zodiacal man. The almanac was an essential tool, a celestial guidebook that helped the physician to align their medical interventions with the perceived harmonies of the vast cosmos that surrounded them. This deep integration of astrology into medical practice added a profound layer of complexity and perceived skill to the physician's art during these times. It distinguished the learned, university-trained physician who could interpret these celestial signs and make informed calculations from less educated practitioners like some barber surgeons or folk healers who might perform bloodletting based more on simple tradition or immediate symptoms without such detailed astrological forethought. The ability to choose the correct astrological moment for an intervention was seen as a mark of true medical wisdom, enhancing their authority and the patient's trust. Beyond the timing, the specific technique of bloodletting also involved established rules and considerations that added to its perceived complexity. As we have touched upon before, the choice of which vein to open was not arbitrary in the slightest. Medical texts describe specific veins that were believed to influence different parts of the body or particular organs. For instance, the cephalic vein in the arm was often chosen for ailments of the head, while the basilic vein was thought to affect the liver and chest. Bleeding from the saphenous vein in the foot or ankle was commonly prescribed for uterine complaints or to draw humors downwards, away from the upper body. The quantity of blood to be let was also a matter of careful judgment, not a random draining of the patient's vital fluids. While sometimes alarming amounts were removed, especially in desperate cases or by less skilled practitioners, the ideal, as outlined in learned medical texts, was a measured removal, tailored to the specific circumstances of the individual patient. This amount would be determined by all the factors previously discussed: the patient's age, their constitution, and their current strength, the nature and severity of the illness, and even the prevailing astrological conditions. Sometimes the physician aimed to let blood until early signs of fainting appeared. Finally, the act of bloodletting was not merely a mechanical removal of fluid from the body. It was also an opportunity for ongoing diagnosis and prognosis by the attending physician. The physician or an experienced barber surgeon would carefully observe the qualities of the blood as it flowed from the incision and as it settled in the collection bowl, its color dark or bright, its consistency thick or thin, the speed at which it coagulated, and the appearance of any separated layers were all scrutinized for clues about the patient's internal state and the nature of their humoral imbalance. This careful observation was part of the art informing decisions about further treatment. As our journey through bloodletting's long history closes, we reflect upon a practice that, for millennia, held a central place in healing. From ancient Egypt and Greece through medieval scholars and into the early modern era, letting blood was a cornerstone of medical intervention. Its decline was slow, resisted by tradition, but new understandings eventually consigned it to medical history. Yet its extraordinary longevity across centuries begs a quiet question. What powerful forces, what deeply held beliefs allowed this often debilitating practice to endure so long? What sustained its reign as a primary therapy against the myriad ailments afflicting humankind? The answers are complex, woven from theory, observation, tradition, and the human desire for relief from suffering. A long and intricate story indeed. One significant reason for bloodletting's persistence lay in the compelling, internally consistent logic it offered within humoral theory. For generations, the idea that the body was governed by four fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow and black bile, and that health depended on their balance, was accepted medical fact. Illness, therefore, was understood as an imbalance, often an excess or corruption of one humor. If one accepted this premise, then removing a portion of the offending or overabundant humor, most visibly blood itself, seemed not just reasonable but an entirely logical and scientifically sound intervention. It was a direct solution to a clearly conceptualized problem. If there was too much of something causing distress, removing some should help restore equilibrium. This provided a strong intellectual foundation for the practice. Beyond its theoretical coherence, bloodletting offered something powerful to patient and practitioner: visible action and tangible results, or so it seemed. In an age where many illnesses were mysterious, bloodletting was a decisive, observable intervention. The patient could see their own blood, often dark and presumed impure, leaving their body. This tangible evidence of something being removed could be profoundly reassuring, creating a psychological sense that the badness was being physically purged. For the physician, the ability to perform such a direct action, to see a quantifiable result in bloodlet, provided a sense of agency over disease. This dramatic ritual was more compelling than simply waiting for nature, offering a sense of immediate therapeutic effect, which was valued. The sheer weight of tradition and the immense authority of ancient medical figures also played an undeniable role in cementing bloodletting's place. The writings of physicians like Hippocrates and, most notably, Galen, who extensively advocated for bloodletting, were treated with almost reverential respect throughout the medieval period and into the Renaissance. Medical education consisted largely of studying these classical texts, memorizing their pronouncements, and applying their principles. To question such venerable authorities was almost unthinkable for many practitioners. The practice was thus passed down from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next, becoming a deeply embedded part of medical culture and societal expectation. This powerful inertia meant bloodletting was not easily dislodged from its esteemed position. Finally, we must consider the medical landscape. For most of its history, there was a profound scarcity of truly effective alternative treatments for most serious illnesses. Before germ theory or antibiotics, physicians had few genuinely curative tools. Bloodletting, however harmful it might often have been, was one of few active interventions available to offer patients. Furthermore, the body's natural capacity to heal means many patients recovered spontaneously. Regardless of treatment, such recoveries when following bloodletting would inevitably be attributed to the procedure, reinforcing belief in its efficacy. The placebo effect, driven by the patient's belief and the healer's authority, might also have played a role in perceived improvements for some symptoms, further solidifying bloodletting's reputation as a valid and potent remedy. Underlying these factors, compelling theory, visible action, tradition, and misinterpreted recovery, was perhaps a fundamental human impulse, the desire to act in the face of illness. When confronted with pain, disease, and the proximity of death, patients and healers felt an urgent need to do something, to intervene with purpose. Passivity was often unbearable. Bloodletting, for all its flaws as we see them now, offered a decisive, tangible, and culturally sanctioned mode of action. It provided a framework for understanding and engaging with illness, a way to transform fear into purposeful ritual. This deep-seated need to intervene, to employ available tools and knowledge, however limited, helps explain the persistence of many historical medical practices and the enduring human quest for healing itself, a timeless drive. And so, our gentle journey through bloodletting's long and complex history, a practice that once held such profound sway over healing, now softly draws to its quiet close. We have wandered through ancient theories, peered into physicians' methods, and glimpsed the hopes and fears of those seeking relief so many centuries ago. The story of this enduring remedy, with its strange and compelling logic, has been told for this evening, its chapters fading like gentle candlelight into the deep quiet of the night, a tale of human efforts in a very different world, a narrative now fully concluded for your deep and peaceful rest. As we reflect on these practices from our modern view, medieval medicine can seem a strange, distant land, with beliefs curious to our eyes indeed. Yet, as we've explored, within their own framework, the theory of the four humors, these actions held a certain logic, a perceived efficacy. It is a quiet reminder that each era grapples with health's mysteries using the knowledge available, striving for well-being even if the paths taken seem unfamiliar to us. A testament to human belief and the enduring desire to understand our bodies and find comforting relief from all that may ail us in our daily lives. Now, as thoughts of bygone days recede, like distant echoes in a quiet hall, may they serve their gentle purpose. May this history's strangeness, its methodological telling, have brought calm, a quiet distraction from present cares. We hope this exploration was a soothing companion as you prepare for slumber. May your mind grow still, your breathing deepen, and may you drift easily now into a night of peaceful, undisturbed rest, enveloped in tranquility and sleep's soft, warm embrace, leaving all worries far behind until morning light returns, bringing with it a brand new day for you to greet. Thank you for joining this quiet exploration of a peculiar yet fascinating chapter of our shared medical history. We sincerely hope it has been a suitably boring and truly restful accompaniment for your evening as you prepare to sleep. Until we meet again for another journey into the quiet corners of the past, we wish you a very calm and deeply restorative night. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and good night from all of us here. May your rest be complete.